I was fishing at my dock that night when a car suddenly sped past me and plunged straight into the river. I froze when I saw the license plate. It was my son's. I screamed for help, and that's when I saw him standing on the shore. He wasn't scared. He just smirked at me, then disappeared into the darkness. When the rescue team pulled the car out, what they found in the trunk left me speechless. Hi everyone, I'm truly grateful you're here. Before we begin, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. This story is fictional, created for powerful storytelling, but the message behind it matters. What was hidden inside that wooden box changed everything. Stay with me, you won't believe what comes next. I never believed an ordinary October night could become the dividing line between the life I thought I had and the truth I was about to uncover. The dock beneath my boots groaned softly as I shifted my weight and cast my line into the Hudson. It was just after 9. The kind of autumn night that carries a thin, biting cold, the sort that slips past your collar and settles deep in your bones. A half-moon hovered behind drifting clouds, spilling pale light across the restless surface of the river. Far off, a row of dim street lamps traced the narrow road that curved along the bank, like a dim scar in the darkness. This had become my routine. Every evening, if the weather allowed, I brought a thermos of black coffee and my old fishing rod down to the dock. Not because I cared much about the fish I released most of what I caught, but because it gave structure to the silence. It gave me somewhere to stand besides the empty rooms of my house. It gave my hands something to do, while my mind tried not to wander too far into memory. My name is Franklin Calloway. I'm 68 years old. I've been a widower since August of 2020. That was the month I lost Helena. 35 years of marriage, 35 years of shared mornings, private jokes, quiet understanding, and arguments that always ended in forgiveness. She was my partner, in every sense of the word, my best friend, the woman who made even ordinary days feel full. The doctors called it a car accident, rain on the pavement, poor visibility, a brief loss of traction. Her sedan sliding sideways into a utility pole on Route 9 while driving home from the grocery store. Quick, violent, final. I remember the knock at the door more clearly than the funeral. A uniformed officer standing on my porch hat, in hand, his voice low and rehearsed. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Calloway. There was nothing anyone could have done." The words reached my ears, but they never quite settled into meaning. Not that night, not the next day, not even now. 3 years later, I still set out 2 mugs in the morning before catching myself. Still reach across the mattress at night, only to find the other side cold and undisturbed. The house we raised our son in, where birthdays were celebrated and anniversaries toasted, and ordinary Tuesdays felt warm, now feels cavernous, echoing, haunted by laughter that no longer exists. Fishing is my excuse to leave it for a while. I can see Helena everywhere in that house. In the kitchen, where she used to sway while stirring sauce, singing old Motown songs off-key, and laughing when I teased her about it. In the living room, where she'd curl her feet beneath my leg on the couch while we rewatched films we already knew by heart. In the garden, she nurtured with quiet devotion, where roses still bloom faithfully every summer, unaware that their caretaker is gone. We were happy, truly happy, and then one rainy night took that happiness away. A small tug on the line pulled me back to the present. I reeled in slowly and found a modest bass flashing in the dim light. Nothing impressive. I worked the hook free with careful fingers and lowered it back into the water. "Swim safe," I murmured. Helena used to laugh at that ritual. "They can't hear you." "Franklin," she'd say, her eyes dancing. Maybe not, but I say it anyway. My thoughts drifted as they always do to Trevor, my son, 38 years old, Chief Executive Officer of Calloway Financial Group, the firm I built from scratch over 3 decades before stepping aside 5 years ago and handing him the reins. By every visible measure, he was thriving. Profits were strong, clients satisfied. He wore tailored suits, drove a luxury car, and lived in a Manhattan penthouse overlooking the skyline. From the outside, he embodied success. From the inside, something had changed. We hardly spoke anymore, not in the way we used to. When he was young, Trevor and I were inseparable. Weekend fishing trips at dawn, backyard baseball games that ended in grass stains and laughter. Late-night talks about the future, his ambitions, his fears. I taught him to drive, guided him through college applications, sat beside him when his first girlfriend broke his heart. He was my boy, my pride. Somewhere along the road to adulthood, distance crept in. Maybe it began in college. Maybe it came with his first taste of corporate power. Or maybe grief reshaped him after Helena died, pushing him toward work instead of toward me. Now our conversations were brief and formal. "How are you, Dad?" "I'm fine." "You busy, work's crazy." "I understand." Click. I told myself not to take it personally. He had responsibilities, pressure, a company to lead. While he built an empire, I stood alone on a wooden dock, holding on to the past. Still, I missed him. Missed the version of Trevor, who once looked at me like I held the answers to everything. A sharper gust of wind swept across the river, sending ripples shivering over the surface. Leaves rustled violently in the trees behind me. I pulled my jacket closer and checked my watch. 9:15. Another 20 minutes, I thought. Then I'd head inside, heat up leftover soup, and pretend to care about whatever flickered on the television. That's when I heard it. An engine. At first it was faint, a distant vibration threading through the quiet. Then it grew louder, unmistakable. A car moving fast along the narrow dirt road that passed beyond the trees behind my property. During daylight, that road saw occasional traffic. It connected to the highway about a mile down. But at night, almost never, especially not on a Wednesday in October. There were no streetlights, no shoulder, just tight lanes cutting between dense forest on one side and the river's drop on the other. The engine roared harder, not cruising, racing. The sound of gravel spraying beneath spinning tires sliced through the air. The vehicle was being pushed harder than any sane driver would dare on that stretch. I turned fully toward the tree line, squinting into the dark. My fishing rod hung loose in my grip. Something was wrong. The noise carried urgency, desperation. The kind of reckless acceleration you hear when someone is fleeing or charging headlong toward disaster. My pulse quickened. The wind seemed to hold its breath. The engine howled closer tires, screeching as they fought for traction on loose stone. Branches shuddered. A shadow flickered between trunks. I felt it before I saw anything. A tightening in my chest, a cold knot forming low in my stomach. Instinct whispered that this was not random, that this was not ordinary. The roar grew louder, still impossibly close, now close enough that I could feel the vibration beneath my boots through the planks of the dock. I stood frozen, heart hammering, every nerve alert. Whatever was coming fast. And deep inside me, beneath the grief and the loneliness and the years of quiet ritual, something shifted, a sense that the fragile balance of my life was about to fracture. I lifted my gaze toward the dark road beyond the trees, and the foreboding settled over me like the cutting October wind across the river. Something terrible was about to happen. The engine roared closer, louder than it had any right to be on that narrow dirt road. I lifted my head and felt the blood drain from my face. Out of the darkness burst a black sedan, headlights off, tearing down the riverbank like something feral. No brake lights, no hesitation. Just reckless speed and the savage growl of an engine being pushed beyond its limits. Gravel sprayed outward in violent arcs, flashing briefly under the thin wash of moonlight as the tires clawed at the uneven ground. My fishing rod slipped from my hands and struck the dock with a hollow clatter, but I barely registered the sound. I couldn't look away. The car was coming straight toward the edge of the bank. Even in the dark, I recognized it. A black Mercedes S-Class, sleek frame, chrome detailing catching stray reflections, the unmistakable shape of a car I'd seen countless times pulling into my driveway. And then the license plate came into view. 7XPJ-492. My breath locked in my throat. That was Trevor's car. No! The word escaped me as a whisper torn apart by the wind. The Mercedes didn't slow. It didn't swerve. It plowed through the low wooden guardrail in an explosion of splintered timber. For one impossible suspended second, it seemed to hover in midair, both front doors already flung open, as if the vehicle itself were trying to escape what was coming. Then gravity claimed it. The car plunged nose first into the Hudson, with a thunderous crash that shook the night. Water erupted upward in a towering plume, glittering silver beneath the moon, before collapsing back in a violent cascade. But the engine was still running. Even from the dock, I could hear it, a strangled guttural roar beneath the surface, machinery fighting the inevitable. The sound churned through the water like a dying animal refusing to yield. The doors. Both front doors remained open, rocking in the current like broken wings. And there was no one inside. What? My voice fractured. An accident. But where? My mind raced, grasping at logic. The car had been moving too fast, too direct, as if it had been aimed. But if this was some terrible accident, why were the doors open before impact? Why were the headlights off? And where was Trevor? I didn't allow myself time to think further. I ran. My boots pounded down the dock toward the small aluminum fishing boat tied at the end. My fingers fumbled clumsily at the rope, slick with river mist, my hands trembling so badly I could barely untie the knot. Behind me, the Mercedes was sinking deeper, the engine sputtering and choking as water flooded the cabin. I finally tore the rope free and threw myself into the boat, nearly capsizing it in my haste. The hull rocked violently as I seized the oars and jammed them into their locks. Row. I pulled hard against the sluggish current muscles, straining lungs burning. My heart hammered so violently in my chest, it felt like it might crack my ribs from the inside. The car floated perhaps 100 yards out, now its rear lifting slightly before tilting forward again. The red taillights still glowed beneath the surface, casting an eerie, distorted light through the dark water. Streams of bubbles rushed upward in furious bursts. The open doors drifted slowly in the current, almost serenely as the vehicle began its steady descent. I rode harder. Cold October winds sliced across the river, biting at my face, numbing my fingers. I didn't feel it. All I could see was that car, my son's car, slipping toward the depths. And then I saw him. A figure stood on the riverbank near the shattered remains of the guardrail. Tall, broad-shouldered, a dark jacket silhouetted against the faint glow of distant street lamps. He wasn't moving. He was simply standing there, watching. My oars faltered mid-stroke. The boat drifted forward under its own momentum as my chest seized. I knew that posture, even from 50 feet away. The slight forward curve of his shoulders. The way he stood with his hands buried in his pockets. It was Trevor. Moonlight touched the side of his face, revealing pale skin and wide, unblinking eyes. He looked terrified, and something else. Guilty. "Trevor!" I shouted, my voice cracking across the water. "Trevor!" His head snapped toward me. Our eyes locked. Across the dark river, across the chaos of sinking metal and swirling water, father and son stared at each other. For one unbearable heartbeat, time seemed to suspend itself. I saw shock in his expression, his mouth parting as if he might speak, might explain, might reach across that distance. He didn't. Instead, he turned and ran. "Trevor, wait!" I screamed, rising to my feet in the unsteady boat. It rocked violently, threatening to pitch me into the water, but I didn't care. "Trevor, stop." He didn't look back. He sprinted toward the road, gravel crunching beneath his shoes. Through the trees, I saw another vehicle, a dark sedan parked just beyond the forest edge. Its engine idled low, headlights extinguished. Trevor threw open the driver's door, dove inside, and slammed it shut. The engine roared. Tires shrieked as the sedan lurched forward, spitting dust and stone into the air. Its taillights flared crimson for a single fleeting second before disappearing around the bend, swallowed whole by the night. And then he was gone. I stood there in the boat oars, hanging loosely from my numb fingers, staring at the empty stretch of road. Behind me, the Mercedes surrendered. The engine sputtered one final choked breath and died. The vehicle tipped forward, slipping beneath the surface with a soft, gurgling hiss. The taillights flickered once, twice. Then darkness consumed them. The river fell silent. Only the faint lapping of water against metal marked where the car had vanished. My legs buckled. I sank onto the wooden seat breath, shuddering out of me in ragged bursts. My entire body trembled, not just from the cold, but from the realization settling like lead in my chest. Trevor had been there. He had watched. My phone rested in my jacket pocket. I pulled it out with shaking hands and stared at the illuminated screen. My thumb hovered above the keypad. For a long moment, I couldn't bring myself to move. Then I dialed. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's voice sounded distant, almost unreal, as though it belonged to another world entirely. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My throat tightened. My chest felt hollow. "Sir, are you there? What's your emergency?" I forced air into my lungs. "I need to report." My voice trembled. I swallowed hard. "A car that was just pushed into the river." "Can you confirm your location, sir?" "Private dock," I managed. "Half a mile south of Riverside Marina. Hudson River. Are there any injuries? Is anyone in the water?" I closed my eyes. I saw Trevor again standing motionless on the shore, watching his car sink. "No," I whispered. "No one's in the water. Can you describe what happened?" The truth felt enormous, crushing. But I pushed the words out anyway. "And I know who did it." There was a pause. "Sir!" My voice shook as the final barrier inside me gave way. "I need to report a car that was just pushed into the river," I said. "And I know who did it." Another silence. It was my son. Police and rescue crews arrived roughly 30 minutes later, though time had long since lost its meaning for me. I was still standing on the riverbank, soaked to the skin, shivering uncontrollably from cold and shock. Red and blue lights strobed across the darkness, splashing violent color over the water. The once black river now shimmered in fractured crimson and electric sapphire. Sirens faded into the distance as engines idled, doors slammed, boots pounded against gravel. Commands were shouted in clipped urgent bursts that cut through the night air. A fire truck rolled to a stop near the shattered guardrail, its heavy tires grinding over splintered wood. Another emergency vehicle positioned itself closer to the dock. Within moments, a rescue boat was being lowered into the Hudson ropes, straining metal creaking as it touched the water, and its engine sputtered awake. All of it unfolded around me, and I barely absorbed a second of it. I stood rigid at the edge of the shore water, dripping from my jacket sleeves, my arms wrapped tightly around my torso, as if I could somehow keep myself from breaking apart. My teeth chattered violently, my knees trembled. The cold had burrowed deep into my bones, but it wasn't just the temperature that made me shake. It was what I had seen, what I knew. Gravel crunched softly behind me. I turned my head. A woman approached, walking with steady, deliberate steps. She appeared to be in her early 40s, sharp eyes, composed posture, short black hair, pulled back into a no-nonsense ponytail. She wore a dark blazer over a crisp white blouse, and a badge gleamed faintly against her belt in the flashing emergency lights. Her expression was calm, controlled, but beneath that composure was intensity and alertness that told me she was already reconstructing the scene in her mind. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "I'm Detective Sarah Caldwell. You're the one who placed the call." I nodded. Speaking felt impossible. "Can you tell me what happened?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came. How could I possibly explain what I had witnessed? How could I translate into words the image of my son standing silently on the shore, watching his own car sink beneath the surface, then fleeing like a man running from guilt? My voice came out hoarse and thin. I saw the car go in, the Mercedes. I tried to... My hand lifted weakly toward the water. Detective Calloway followed the gesture, then returned her gaze to my face. She studied me carefully. Too carefully. For a brief, unsettling moment, I had the sense she could see the truth written across me. "We'll recover it," she said. "The dive team is already deploying. Just stay here. Stay here." I wanted to collapse. I wanted to sink to my knees and let the earth swallow me whole. But my legs wouldn't bend. I remained frozen, staring out at the dark water where the car had vanished. An hour passed. Massive floodlights were erected along the shoreline, transforming night into a stark, artificial daylight. The brightness was almost blinding after so much darkness. I watched divers move methodically through the river, attaching heavy cables to the submerged Mercedes. Their movements were precise, efficient, clinical. A heavy-duty tow truck positioned itself near the water's edge. Its engine growled low as the winch engaged steel cable tightening with a strained metallic whine. Slowly, reluctantly, the car began to rise. Water poured from its open doors and shattered windows and heavy sheets crashing back into the river. The black paint gleamed slick under the floodlights. The front end was crushed inward from the impact, hood buckle grille twisted into something grotesque. But there was no mistaking it. It was Trevor's car. The winch continued pulling until the vehicle cleared the shoreline. With a grinding screech of metal against gravel, the tow truck dragged it fully onto land. Rescue personnel swarmed around it instantly. Flashlights pierced every corner of the cabin. Officers peered into the front seats. Others circled toward the rear. I stood several feet away, hands jammed deep into my pockets, breath shallow, heart racing. Then someone called out, "Detective, we've got something." An officer crouched at the open trunk, his flashlight beam cutting through the wet interior. Detective Calloway moved quickly toward him. Without realizing it, I followed. Inside the trunk, partially concealed by soaked carpeting and scattered debris, sat a small black safe. It was roughly the size of a briefcase, heavy steel construction, a combination dial at the front. Water streamed from its edges, pooling beneath it on the gravel. The officer tugged at the handle. It didn't move. "Locked tight," he said. Detective Calloway's eyes flicked toward me. There was no accusation in her expression yet, but there was something else. Expectation. "Mr. Calloway," she said slowly. "Do you know who this vehicle belongs to?" The air thickened instantly. Every sound seemed to dull. I could feel the weight of every gaze on that riverbank, officers, firefighters, paramedics, all waiting for my answer. I could lie. I could claim ignorance. I could give Trevor time to run. But what would that make me? Helena's face flashed in my mind. Her voice, her unwavering belief in honesty, in integrity, in doing what was right even when it carved you open. Especially when it carved you open. I swallowed hard. It's my son's car. The words felt like stones dragged from deep within my chest. Detective Calloway's expression sharpened. Your son, Trevor Calloway, 38, CEO of Calloway Financial Group. My breath hitched. I saw him. Tonight. He was standing right there when the car went into the water, and then he drove away. A ripple of murmurs swept through the responders. Detective Calloway lifted a hand, silencing them. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Mr. Calloway, are you telling me your son intentionally put this car into the river? I stared at the mud beneath my boots and nodded. Someone muttered a quiet curse. Detective Calloway's jaw tightened. She turned back to the safe. Call a locksmith, she ordered. Now. Another 40 minutes passed before the locksmith arrived, a wiry man in his 50s with weathered hands and a worn tool bag slung across his shoulder. He knelt beside the safe as though approaching a delicate operation. His eyes narrowed as he examined the combination lock. Officers formed a loose semicircle around him, floodlights casting long, stark shadows behind them. The air was tense, silent. I stood at the edge of the circle, arms crossed tightly over my chest, heart pounding so violently I thought I might collapse. I didn't know what was inside that safe. I didn't know what Trevor had tried so desperately to erase by drowning his own car. But I knew one thing. Whatever was inside mattered. The locksmith began working. Small metallic clicks echoed softly as his tools scraped and adjusted within the mechanism. Minutes stretched into something unbearable. Every second felt magnified. Then, click. The sound was subtle, almost gentle. The lock gave way. The locksmith leaned back, nodding. Detective Calloway slipped on a pair of latex gloves and crouched beside the safe. She gripped the handle, slowly, carefully. She lifted the lid. A beam of white light from an officer's flashlight cut into the darkness inside. I couldn't see the contents from where I stood, but I saw her face. The color drained from it instantly. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, not in anger, in something deeper. Her lips pressed into a thin, controlled line, as if forcing herself not to react. Then she looked up at me. And for the first time since she had arrived on scene, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Fear. Mr. Calloway, she said quietly, her voice tight with restraint. You need to sit down, right now. When I looked inside the safe, the world tilted. For a second, maybe longer, I couldn't move, couldn't inhale. The chaos around me, the floodlights, the murmur of officers, the distant churn of river water, collapsed into a dull, ringing hum. Everything narrowed to the inside of that small black box, illuminated by the hard white beam of Detective Calloway's flashlight. 3 black USB drives lay side by side, perfectly aligned. Each one bore a strip of white tape with a handwritten label. October 2021, March 2022, July 2023. The dates felt deliberate, methodical, like milestones. Beside them rested a leather-bound notebook, its cover darkened and warped from river water, but still intact. The pages were swollen edges curling, yet I could see the ink had held. Tight rows of numbers filled the sheets, columns of figures, dates, initials, account references. It wasn't random scribbling. It was organized, systematic, written in a hand that was careful, precise, almost obsessive. Under the notebook was cash, stacks of it. $50,000, at least $100 bills wrapped in rubber bands, damp but unmistakable. The green paper clung together, heavy with water, yet still thick and real. And beneath the money, documents, a stack of contracts maybe 10 or 12 pages deep, printed on the thick professional stock. The edges were soaked and curling, but the text remained legible under the light. And at the bottom of every page, Franklin Calloway. My name, my signature, except it wasn't. My hands began to tremble. I leaned closer despite Detective Calloway's quick cautionary glance. My eyes traced the ink, the curve of the R, the slanted stem of the M, the flourish beneath Calloway. It was close, painfully close, but it wasn't mine. That's not my signature, I heard myself say. Detective Calloway's head turned sharply toward me. Excuse me, that signature, I said, pointing my finger unsteady. It looks like mine, but it isn't. I didn't sign those. She studied me, carefully measured, skeptical. Then she lifted one of the contracts from the safe and held it closer to the floodlight. Her gaze flicked from the page to my face and back again. "Mr. Calloway," she said slowly, "this appears identical to your signature." "I know it does," I replied, my voice thin, "but it's not mine." My throat felt tight. I swallowed and forced myself to continue. "I've signed thousands of documents over 35 years. Contracts, board approvals, loan agreements. I know how my hand moves. I know the pressure I use." I stepped closer. "The M here, it's too steep. I angle mine more gradually. And the tail on the final L, I loop it back under slightly. I always do. Whoever signed this didn't." She said nothing. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she compared the lines. I could see doubt in her expression. She thought I was deflecting, covering myself, protecting my reputation. But I wasn't. Then she reached back into the safe again and pulled out something else. A white envelope. Sealed. On the front, written in thick black marker, were 2 words. "Helena, proof." My breath stopped. Helena? My wife's name. The world lurched. My knees weakened and I reached blindly for the side of the tow truck to steady myself. "What is that?" I whispered. Detective Calloway didn't answer immediately. She turned the envelope over in her gloved hand, studying it. Then her eyes moved to mine. Her expression had changed. Less suspicion now. More caution. "We're taking all of this into evidence," she said evenly. "Including you, Mr. Calloway. I need you to come to the station to give a formal statement." I barely heard her. All I could see was that handwriting. Sharp. Pressed hard into the paper. Trevor's handwriting. I had seen it on birthday cards. On notes he'd left for Helena. On signatures and company memos. There was no mistaking it. Why would Trevor label an envelope with Helena's name? What proof could possibly exist 3 years after her death? And why hide it in a safe and drive it into a river? The drive to the station took 20 minutes. It felt like hours. I sat in the back of Detective Calloway's sedan, staring through the window at empty streets sliding past and blurred streaks of yellow light. My clothes clung damply to my skin. I couldn't stop shivering. The safe and everything inside it had been sealed in evidence bags and loaded into a van. On the way to the station, Detective Calloway made a brief call, her voice low, professional. Financial fraud, falsified documents, potential federal involvement. By the time we pulled into the station lot, the FBI was already waiting. Agent Marcus Cole stood in the lobby when we entered. Mid-40s, tall, broad shoulders, close-cropped hair flecked with gray. He wore a dark suit and a burgundy tie, the knot tight and precise. His posture was controlled, economical, as if every movement had been trained into efficiency. When he extended his hand, his grip was firm, but measured. "Mr. Calloway," he said, in a steady, resonant voice. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Cole with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I understand tonight has been difficult." I nodded. Words were still fragile things. He gestured toward a hallway. "Let's talk." They placed me in a small interview room, windowless fluorescent lights humming faintly overhead. A metal table bolted to the floor. 2 chairs opposite one another. A camera blinking silently in the upper corner. Detective Calloway sat across from me, notepad open, pen poised. Agent Cole stood near the door, at first arms crossed, observing. They asked questions. Precise, methodical. When had I last seen Trevor? How would I describe our relationship? Had I noticed unusual behavior in recent months? Was I aware of any questionable financial dealings within Calloway Financial Group? Had I ever signed blank documents? Did I know anyone named Eddie Torres? Each question felt like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, hinting at depths I hadn't imagined. I answered honestly, sometimes slowly, sometimes with long pauses, but my mind kept returning to the envelope. Helena, proof. What could Trevor possibly have uncovered or hidden? After nearly an hour, Agent Cole finally moved from the wall and sat down across from me. He folded his hands on the metal table and leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Calloway," he said quietly, "we're going to analyze those USB drives. We'll examine the notebook, the contracts, every piece of evidence recovered from that vehicle." His eyes held mine steadily. "I need to be direct with you." He paused, not for effect, but as though measuring the weight of what came next. "What we find may be extremely painful." My chest tightened. "It may contradict what you believe about your son," he continued, "about your company, possibly even about your wife." The air felt thinner. "What are you saying?" I managed. He exhaled slowly. "I'm saying that if those documents are forged, if your signature was falsified, that suggests an extended pattern of fraud. The USB drives likely contain Digital records, transactions, histories, communications, offshore accounts. He didn't soften it. If your son has been involved in criminal activity, the evidence may be extensive. My hands clenched against the table, and the envelope I asked, Detective Calloway and Agent Cole exchanged a glance. "We haven't opened it yet," she said carefully. "But if it references your wife, and if it's labeled proof, it may relate to something far beyond financial misconduct." The words landed like ice. Agent Cole leaned closer. "I need to ask you something important." His voice was steady, but there was something behind it now. Concern. Once we open those drives and that envelope, he said, there's no going back. The truth, whatever it is, won't be something you can unlearn. My throat went dry. He held my gaze. "Are you sure," he asked quietly, "that you want to know?" 2 days later, the FBI called me back in. I hadn't slept since the night at the river. Every time I closed my eyes, I was there again standing on the dock, watching the black Mercedes tear through the guardrail. I saw Trevor on the shore, frozen in the pale light, his face drained of color. I saw the look in his eyes when he realized I was there. Fear, shock, and something heavier. Guilt. I heard the crash of metal hitting water, the muffled drowning growl of the engine beneath the Hudson's surface. And above all of it, I saw that white envelope in my mind. Helena. Proof, written in Trevor's unmistakable hand. For 2 days, I existed in a haze. I didn't eat. I barely moved. The house felt even larger than usual, the silence more oppressive. My phone rang constantly, reporters, board members, old acquaintances, suddenly curious about my welfare. I let it go to voicemail every time. I sat in the living room staring at nothing, waiting for answers that I wasn't sure I could survive. On Friday afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock, I walked into the FBI's Manhattan field office. The building felt sterile, impersonal, all glass and steel and quiet authority. Agent Marcus Cole met me on the 7th floor. He led me into a conference room that looked like it had been designed to strip emotion from the air. White walls, fluorescent lights. A long table covered in neatly arranged folders, printed reports, and sealed evidence bags. Detective Sarah Caldwell stood near the window, arms folded, her face unreadable. "Mr. Calloway," Agent Cole said evenly. "Thank you for coming." I sat. My hands were clasped tightly in my lap to stop them from shaking. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "We've completed the preliminary analysis of the materials recovered from the safe," Agent Cole began. He opened a thick folder and slid it toward me. "What we uncovered is substantial." I didn't touch it. I couldn't. He didn't wait for me to gather myself. Instead, he began laying documents across the table, methodical and precise. 3 USB drives, he said, each containing financial records spanning the last 4 years, bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, offshore account logs. "We've cross-referenced everything with Calloway Financial Group's official filings." He looked up. "Mr. Calloway, someone has been siphoning money from your company's client trust accounts for 4 years." The words didn't register at first. How much I managed? $47 million. The number struck like a physical blow. The air seemed to vanish from the room. $47 million, I repeated, barely hearing my own voice. "Yes." He slid another document forward, a detailed wire transfer sheet. "In addition, we found payments totaling $2.3 million directed toward various regulatory officials, tax auditors, compliance officers, individuals positioned to overlook discrepancies, bribery." The word hung unspoken but obvious. "And there's more," he continued. $8 million in unreported income funneled through shell corporations and falsified consulting agreements. It appears designed to conceal the embezzlement and avoid IRS scrutiny." The numbers felt surreal, abstract. 47, 2.3, 8. But they weren't abstract. They were crimes. "And here's the critical issue, Mr. Calloway." Agent Cole's voice lowered slightly. "Every transaction, every authorization was executed under your name." He pushed a stack of contracts toward me. My forged signature stared back from the bottom of each page. "Our forensic document examiners conducted a full comparative analysis," he said. "They reviewed these against authenticated samples of your handwriting from legal filings, tax returns, and board resolutions." He paused. "The forged signatures match your legitimate signature at approximately 94% accuracy." 94%. I stared at the ink, the curves, the slant. It looked like me, close enough to convince anyone who wasn't looking carefully. "But it wasn't me," I said, my voice hollow. I know, Agent Cole replied quietly. We know. He tapped one of the pages. The inconsistencies are subtle, microscopic pressure variations, letter spacing, the way the pen lifts at the end of certain strokes. It's nearly flawless, but not flawless. Relief flickered briefly. Then rage followed. Trevor. I said the name rough in my throat. He studied my signature. He practiced it. He forged it. Agent Cole didn't contradict me. That is our working theory, he confirmed. Why I demanded. Why would he risk everything? Agent Cole folded his hands. Control, he said. Money, leverage. He gestured toward another document. You own 65% of Callaway Financial Group. Trevor owns 20%. The remainder is divided among minority shareholders. I understood before he finished. If you were prosecuted and convicted for these financial crimes, Agent Cole continued, you would lose your shares, your position, your reputation, control of the company, and Trevor would inherit it all, I said quietly. He gave a small nod. Silence filled the room. I stared at the evidence, the paper trail of betrayal. My son, the boy I'd taught to fish, to drive, to stand upright in a world that rewarded shortcuts. He had attempted to destroy me. I'm not going to let him win, I said at last, my voice steadier now. I'll fight this. You'll need legal representation, Agent Cole replied. White-collar defense, someone experienced. I know someone. Jonathan Pierce came immediately to mind. Sharp, uncompromising, brilliant in a courtroom. I'll call him. Detective Callaway finally spoke. Mr. Callaway, she said carefully. There's something else. Her tone made my stomach tighten. Agent Cole reached into one of the evidence bags and withdrew the white envelope. Helena, proof. Even from across the table, the handwriting felt like a blow. He held it gently, almost reverently. He didn't open it. Not yet. Mr. Callaway, he said, and for the first time since I'd met him, his voice softened. Before we proceed further, I need to prepare you. The room seemed smaller. This envelope, he continued, was sealed and hidden with the financial records. Based on preliminary context, from the USB files, we believe it contains information related to your wife's death. The words froze the air. That accident, I whispered. He didn't answer immediately. It may not have been what you were told, he said carefully. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead. My pulse pounded in my ears. 3 years ago, they had said rain, poor visibility, hydroplaning. Nothing anyone could have done. Agent Cole looked at me steadily. If what we suspect is accurate, this may change your understanding of that night. My hands tightened against the metal table. I felt as though I were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into darkness. He lifted the envelope slightly. Are you sure, he asked gently, that you want to see what's inside? The question hung between us. Behind it was everything. My son, my company, my wife, Helena. If I opened that envelope, there would be no returning to ignorance, no rebuilding the past into something less terrible. But I had already lost sleep, lost certainty, lost trust. I need to know, I said. My voice didn't tremble this time. Agent Cole studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. And with careful hands, he began to break the seal on the envelope marked Helena, proof. My hands trembled as I broke the seal on the envelope. For a moment, I simply stared inside, unable to process what I was seeing. What lay within was far worse than anything I had imagined. A small digital audio recorder rested on top. Beneath it sat a manila folder bearing the letterhead of a private investigation firm, and under that a stack of glossy photographs showing the underside of a vehicle, Helena's vehicle, the Honda Accord she had been driving the night she died. My pulse began to pound in my ears. Agent Cole gently lifted the recorder. Mr. Callaway, he said quietly, I need you to listen to this. He pressed play. At first there was only static faint crackling. Then a voice cut through it, her voice. Helena, Trevor, I know what you've been doing. My chest tightened. Even through the distortion, I could hear the restraint in her tone. Anger carefully contained, fear just beneath the surface. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. Trevor, I would have known his voice anywhere. Don't lie to me, Helena said. I hired someone, a forensic accountant. He found everything. $5 million, Trevor. You stole $5 million from the company. Silence. Then Trevor's voice returned different now, harder. You hired someone to investigate me. I had to. Your father trusted you. He gave you control of daily operations, and you, her voice cracked slightly. How could you do this to him, to us? I didn't steal anything, Trevor said flatly. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. Borrowed. Helena's restraint slipped. You funneled it through shell corporations. You falsified records. That's not borrowing. That's embezzlement. Another pause. When Trevor spoke again, his voice was disturbingly calm. What are you going to do? I'm going to the police tomorrow morning, and then I'm telling your father everything. Mom, his tone shifted lower, almost pleading, but underneath it, something else lurked, something cold. You shouldn't do that. I have to, she said firmly. You committed a crime, Trevor. I won't protect you from this. Mom, this conversation is over. The recording ended with a faint click. I stared at the device in Agent Cole's hand, my entire body trembling. That conversation had taken place 1 week before Helena's death. 1 week. Agent Cole opened the manila folder and slid the contents toward me. It was a report from a private investigator, Gerald Moss, former NYPD. Helena had hired him quietly without telling me. The report was meticulous. Bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts, shell corporations registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. $5 million, just as she had said on the recording. At the bottom of the final page, written in Helena's familiar, elegant script, I have to tell Franklin. I have to make this right. My vision blurred. Agent Cole placed the photographs in front of me next. We had these examined by our forensic automotive specialists, he said. I picked up the first image, the underside of Helena's Honda Accord. The brake line was circled in red. It had been cut, not worn, not corroded, not snapped from impact. Cut, clean, precise incisions, deliberate. The damage was subtle enough that the line would hold briefly long enough for her to begin driving, but would fail under sustained pressure. Under braking, the room seemed to tilt sideways. It had been raining that night, late summer storm, sheets of water turning asphalt into slick black glass. Helena had been coming home from book club. I remembered standing in the doorway telling her to be careful. She'd laughed softly and kissed my cheek. I've been driving in the rain for 40 years, Franklin. I think I can handle it. Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Her car had left Route 9 near the bend by the old mill. She'd struck a utility pole at high speed. The airbag deployed, but the impact was catastrophic. She was gone before the paramedics arrived. The police ruled it an accident. Wet roads, reduced visibility, loss of control. It had made sense. I had believed them. I buried my wife. I mourned her. I spent 3 years blaming rain, blaming the road, blaming fate. But it wasn't fate. It was Trevor. I looked at Agent Cole, my voice barely audible. He took her from me. The words felt unreal. He cut the brakes. He caused the crash. My throat closed. Based on this evidence, Agent Cole said carefully, we are formally reopening the investigation into your wife's death. Automotive forensics will re-examine the vehicle records. We'll review the original crash findings and conduct fresh interviews. If Trevor Calloway is responsible, we will establish it. Something inside me gave way. All the grief I had been holding for 3 years surged forward. Loneliness, regret, anger, unanswered questions. I covered my face with my hands and wept. I wept for Helena, for the mornings we would never share again, for the empty side of the bed, for the son I thought I had raised to be better than this. Detective Calloway rested a steady hand on my shoulder. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Time blurred. Eventually the tears slowed. I lowered my hands and stared again at the photographs of the severed brake lines. $5 million. That was what Helena had discovered. Enough to send Trevor to prison. Enough to destroy his reputation. But was it enough to kill for... My mind shifted. $47 million. That was the full embezzlement uncovered by the FBI. $5 million had only been the beginning. Trevor hadn't just stolen a small sum and panicked. He had been building something larger. The forged signatures, the shell corporations, the bribes, the tax fraud, and the plan to frame me. If I had been charged and convicted, I would have lost everything: my company, my shares, my legacy. On my 65% stake, Trevor would have inherited control. Helena hadn't simply threatened to expose $5 million. She had become the first obstacle in a much larger scheme. And I had been the final target. A cold realization settled over me. Helena's death had not been the end of his desperation. It had been the beginning of his strategy. Silence her, continue siphoning funds, forge my signature, frame me, take everything. Trevor hadn't acted in panic. He had acted with calculation. I pushed back my chair slowly. My legs felt unsteady, but they held. Agent Cole and Detective Calloway both watched me carefully. The grief was still there, the shock, the devastation. but beneath it, something else had formed. Clarity. I met Agent Cole's gaze. When I spoke, my voice no longer shook. "Find Trevor," I said. The words were calm, measured. "Oh, I want to look him in the eyes." Agent Cole studied me for a long moment. "We will," he replied. I didn't look back at the photographs. I didn't need to. The truth had already burned itself into me. My son had stolen from me. He had tried to destroy me, and he had taken the woman I loved. Now there would be no more silence. No more excuses. No more illusions. Only justice. 3 days later, on Monday morning, the storm finally broke. I woke to the relentless vibration of my phone on the nightstand beside me. It buzzed, paused, buzzed again, an endless cycle that dragged me out of a shallow, fractured sleep. For a moment, I didn't move. I stared at the ceiling, disoriented, my mind still tangled in dreams of river water and flashing lights. The phone buzzed again. I reached for it with an unsteady hand. 12 missed calls, 27 text messages, 17 voicemails, and at the top of my screen, glowing in bold letters, a news alert. CEO Trevor Calloway turns himself and accuses father of massive embezzlement scheme. My chest constricted. I sat upright in bed so quickly the room tilted. My pulse hammered in my ears as I unlocked the screen and tapped the notification. The headline expanded into a full article. In a stunning development, Trevor Calloway, 38 CEO of Calloway Financial Group, voluntarily surrendered to authorities this morning and announced he will hold a press conference at 2 p.m. Sources close to the investigation claim Calloway intends to expose his father, company founder Franklin Calloway, 68, as the architect of a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I stopped breathing. I scrolled. Every major outlet had the story. National networks, financial publications, even international media. Social platforms were flooded with commentary, outrage, disbelief, condemnation, and nearly all of it was directed at me. By noon, I was sitting in my living room, the television casting flickering light across the walls. Every channel was running some version of the same banner. Father or son, billions at stake. My phone had rung so many times I had finally powered it off. Through the front windows I could see them. Satellite vans, tripods, journalists pacing on the sidewalk, rehearsing lines into handheld microphones. The outside world had turned my home into a spectacle. At precisely 2:00 p.m., the press conference began. The camera cut to a podium set up outside the Manhattan precinct, where Trevor had turned himself in. He stood there composed and polished in a navy suit, flanked by a sharply dressed man, identified on the lower third as Richard Lawson, defense attorney. Trevor looked calm, measured, his shoulders squared, his expression solemn. He looked like a man burdened by truth. He looked like a victim. Lawson stepped forward first. "Good afternoon," he said smoothly. "My client Trevor Calloway has voluntarily cooperated with law enforcement and is here today to make a statement. This has not been an easy decision, but, Mr. Calloway believes it is his moral obligation to come forward with the truth, regardless of the personal cost." He stepped aside. Trevor approached the microphone. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice was steady, yet tinged with restrained emotion. "This is the most difficult moment of my life, but I cannot remain silent any longer." He paused, lowering his gaze as though gathering strength. "For several years, he continued, my father, Franklin Calloway, has been systematically embezzling funds from Calloway Financial Group. Tens of millions of dollars have been diverted from client trust accounts routed through offshore entities and concealed behind falsified documentation." My stomach dropped. "I discovered irregularities nearly 2 years ago," Trevor said. "I struggled with what to do. I didn't want to believe it. My father built this company. He built our name." His voice wavered slightly. "I began documenting everything. I compiled evidence. I secured it, hoping there would be some explanation, hoping I was wrong." He shook his head. "But when he realized I knew, he attempted to frame me. He forged documents. He staged the abandonment of his vehicle in the Hudson River to destroy evidence. And when that failed, he tried to manipulate law enforcement into pursuing me." He looked directly into the camera lens. "I love my father, but I cannot shield him from accountability, not when innocent clients have suffered, not when livelihoods are at stake. Doing the right thing may cost me everything, but I will not look away." The press corps erupted. Questions flew from every direction, but Trevor stepped back, and Lawson smoothly took control, deflecting inquiries with practiced precision. I sat motionless on my couch. He had done it. He had inverted reality. He cast himself as the principled son who bravely exposed corruption and me as the criminal patriarch clinging to power. And the world believed him. Within the hour, financial networks reported the damage. Callaway Financial Group's stock had plunged 40%. Trading was halted twice due to volatility. Clients were flooding the company's call centers. Investors were panicking. The board had convened an emergency session. By 5 o'clock, an email arrived. Mr. Callaway, in light of the recent allegations and ongoing investigation, the board of directors has voted to suspend your authority as chairman and majority shareholder pending further review. You are prohibited from entering company premises or accessing corporate accounts until further notice. Legal counsel will contact you. I read it twice. 35 years of work, gone. My reputation shattered in a single afternoon. My legacy reduced to headlines and speculation. My phone, now powered back on to retrieve the email, vibrated again. I nearly ignored it. I had no strength left for reporters, lawyers, or strangers demanding explanations. But the name on the screen stopped me. Thomas Parker. For over a decade, Thomas had been my closest executive partner. I had trusted him implicitly. When Trevor assumed leadership, I had asked Thomas to step aside from direct oversight and mentor my son. If anyone understood the internal workings of that company, it was Thomas. I answered. Mr. Callaway. His voice was low, urgent. I've been trying to reach you all day. I saw the press conference. Thomas. My throat tightened. I didn't. I know, he interrupted firmly. I know you didn't do this. I closed my eyes, and I can prove it, he added. The words cut through the noise in my mind. You can, what? I have documentation Trevor doesn't know exists, Thomas said. Internal audit logs, server backups, access records. I kept copies when I stepped down from daily operations. I didn't trust some of the transactions I was seeing. My heart began to pound again, but this time with something different. Hope. What kind of evidence? I asked carefully. The kind that shows who authorized the wire transfers, he replied. The kind that traces IP logins. The kind that proves the forged documents originated from Trevor's secured workstation. I gripped the phone tighter. We can't discuss this over the line, Thomas said. Too risky. We need to meet. Tonight. Where? I'll send you a location. Quiet. Off the record. There was a pause. I believe you, he said quietly, and I'm not going to let him bury you. I exhaled slowly, the first steady breath I'd taken all day. In the middle of chaos and the aftermath of public humiliation, a single voice had broken through the noise. Mr. Callaway? Thomas repeated, his tone resolute. I need to see you tonight. I have evidence about Trevor. For the first time since that Monday morning began, the narrative no longer felt entirely out of my control. Send me the address, I said. And as I ended the call, I realized something. Trevor had launched his attack, but he had not anticipated resistance. Not from me, and not from Thomas Parker. Thomas Parker arrived at my house at exactly 10 o'clock that night. By then, the reporters had finally retreated their vans, disappearing one by one down the darkened street. But the silence they left behind wasn't peace. It was the kind of silence that presses against your ears, heavy and watchful. Every shadow beyond the porch light felt like a threat. Every passing car made my pulse spike. I stood inside the foyer, staring at Thomas through the peephole before I unlocked the door. Trust had become a foreign concept. Thomas stood on the porch, hands buried in the pockets of his overcoat, his breath visible in the cold October air. The years had not been kind to him. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I remembered, his posture slightly stooped, as though he'd been carrying something weighty for a long time. I opened the door. Mr. Callaway, he said quietly. There was no warmth in his tone, only gravity. I stepped aside. He entered without another word. We settled in the living room, the same room where only hours earlier I had watched my son dismantle my life on live television. The television was dark now, its reflection faint in the glass. But I could still see Trevor's face in my mind, controlled, composed, righteous. Thomas sat opposite me, a worn leather briefcase resting on his lap. He didn't speak at first. He studied me carefully. I don't know who to trust anymore, I said at last, my voice raw. The board suspended me. The media's crucified me. Even federal investigators are looking at me like I'm capable of this. I swallowed. And my own son. The rest caught in my throat. Thomas nodded once. I saw the press conference. Then you know what he's claiming. I do. And it's a lie. I looked up sharply. Something fragile stirred in my chest. Hope mixed with desperation. How can you be so sure? Thomas leaned forward slightly, fingers resting on the briefcase. Because I've been watching him for years. The words settled between us. What does that mean? I asked. You asked me to step down as COO 3 years ago, he reminded me. You wanted me to mentor Trevor, help him transition into full leadership. I did that. I worked under him. I observed his decisions, his access patterns, his spending authority. He paused, and I noticed inconsistencies. My pulse quickened. Inconsistencies how? Thomas opened the briefcase. Inside was a thick folder worn at the edges packed with documents. He placed it on the coffee table between us. The weight of it alone felt ominous. Transaction records, he said. Files Trevor attempted to erase from the company's servers. I recovered copies before they were permanently scrubbed. I stared at the stack. What do they show? Wire transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, patterns that didn't align with legitimate business operations. He flipped the folder open. Page after page of printed statements, bank routing numbers, highlighted figures, notes scrawled in the margins. Transfers in increments of $200,000, $500,000, $1 million at a time, all routed through corporate entities I had never approved. He was meticulous, Thomas continued. He used layered transfers. Funds moved through 3 or 4 holding companies before landing in offshore accounts. But every sequence traces back to his credentials. I leaned closer, scanning the lines. The sums were staggering. Thomas withdrew another stack from the briefcase. Emails, printed and clipped together. At the top of each thread, Trevor Calloway. And another name, Eddie Torres. Who is Eddie Torres? I asked, though a cold instinct already formed in my chest. Thomas's jaw tightened. Independent mechanic. Operates a small auto shop in Queens. The air left my lungs. 3 years ago, Thomas added quietly. The same year Helena died. I felt the room tilt. What are you implying? Thomas slid one email toward me. Dated 1 week before Helena's accident. Subject line, final payment. Delivery confirmed. I had a contact in the NYPD run a background check on Torres, Thomas said. Prior charges include fraud, forgery, and evidence tampering. Minor convictions. Nothing major. But he's known in certain circles. I swallowed. Circles for what? For doing things quietly. My voice dropped to a whisper. You're saying Trevor hired him to sabotage Helena's car? Thomas held my gaze. Yes. The word landed like a hammer. I stared at the email chain, my hands shaking uncontrollably now. Payment confirmations, instructions, a final message reading, it's done. Thomas removed another set of documents, credit card statements, and expense reports. And this, he said softly, is where much of the money went. I scanned the pages. Luxury hotel suites in Las Vegas, private villas in Monaco, casino transactions $50,000, $100,000, $200,000 in single nights. Flights to Macau, designer boutiques in Milan, then the darker charges, coded transactions linked to escort services, cash withdrawals in international hubs. He wasn't investing stolen funds, Thomas said. He was spending them. I closed my eyes briefly. How much? In personal expenditures alone over 4 years, Thomas hesitated. Nearly $10 million. $10 million. While retirees trusted us with their savings. While families depended on our stability. While Helena discovered the truth and lost her life for it. And the rest, I asked hollowly. Parked offshore, likely intended as leverage or escape capital. The room felt smaller. I looked at Thomas. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Guilt flickered across his face. I didn't have enough. Trevor was careful. He scrubbed logs, restricted access, manipulated internal audits. I began noticing irregularities about 18 months ago. But I needed hard proof. He exhaled slowly. And I struggled with the reality of it. He's your son. I mentored him. I didn't want to believe he was capable of something this calculated. He looked toward the dark television screen. But after watching him today standing in front of cameras and accusing you of crimes he committed, I knew silence wasn't an option anymore. For the first time since the press conference, something inside me steadied. A thin line of resolve. Will you testify? I asked. Thomas didn't hesitate. Yes. The answer was immediate. I will testify in court, under oath. I will provide server logs, email backups, transaction data, everything I've preserved. He stood slowly, meeting my eyes. But before we get there, he said, voice firm, we must dismantle the foundation of his case. I knew what he meant. The signatures, I said. He nodded. If Trevor's argument stands, it hinges on those forged documents appearing authentic. We need an independent forensic document examiner, one beyond the federal team, to validate what we already suspect. That they're fabricated. That they were constructed to implicate you. I rose to my feet as well. For days I had felt cornered. Now I felt something different. Anger but controlled. Purpose. Then we start there, I said. Thomas closed the briefcase. We start by proving the signatures are forged. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. For the first time since Trevor's betrayal went public, I no longer felt alone in the fight. And this time, I would not be blindsided. This time, we would build the case piece by piece, until the truth could no longer be twisted, until the man who called himself my son had nowhere left to hide. In the days that followed, Thomas and I worked without rest. Jonathan Pierce transformed a corner of his Manhattan office into what he called a war room. The blinds stayed drawn, coffee cups multiplied. The long conference table disappeared beneath stacks of documents, laptops, printed bank statements, and evidence photos. The walls were covered in timelines, Helena's accident in August 2020, the first suspicious transfer weeks earlier, the offshore accounts opened under false names, the Stage River incident, strings of red marker connected dates and dollar amounts. Every arrow pointed back to one name, Trevor. Agent Marcus Cole and Detective Sarah Caldwell joined us daily. They moved through the room with a quiet intensity, reviewing transaction logs, forensic reports, and recovered emails. Every document Trevor had forged, every shell company he had created, every lie he had told, laid bare under fluorescent lights. The first major breakthrough came from Dr. Helen Cooper. Jonathan had hired her independently, a forensic document examiner with over 35 years of courtroom testimony behind her name. She was small, precise, and carried herself with the calm authority of someone who had spent decades dissecting deception. For 3 days she worked in near silence, studying the forged signatures under magnification. When she finally looked up from her microscope, her eyes were sharp. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "these signatures were not written by hand." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "They were digitally reproduced." She slid a blown-up image toward me. "Your authentic signature was scanned, manipulated, and printed onto these documents. Under magnification, you can see pixelation artifacts. Real ink penetrates paper fibers. It shows pressure variation. These do not." Agent Cole leaned forward, studying the enlarged image. "Can you testify to that?" he asked. Dr. Cooper nodded. "Absolutely. I've seen this technique before. It's sophisticated, but not invisible." For the first time in days, I felt a breath of relief. The forged foundation of Trevor's accusation had cracks. The second breakthrough came sooner than expected. The FBI located Eddie Torres. He was found at his auto garage in Newark, 52 years old, minor criminal record, financially unstable. When Agent Cole and 2 federal agents confronted him, it took less than 20 minutes for him to collapse. His confession was recorded on video. 3 years earlier, in August 2020, Trevor Calloway had paid him $15,000 in cash to tamper with the brake lines on a Honda Accord. No questions asked. He described how he made clean incisions subtle enough to delay failure until braking pressure intensified. A week later, Torres saw the news report about Helena Calloway's fatal crash on Route 9. "I didn't know it was his mother," Torres said on camera, voice shaking. "I swear I didn't know. I've been living with that guilt ever since." Agent Cole played the video for us in the war room. I sat motionless, staring at the screen as Torres described in detail how he had sabotaged my wife's car. Jonathan placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "This reopens Helena's case," he said quietly. "This is homicide, Franklin." The word echoed. Homicide. But the most devastating evidence came from the financial forensics team. The FBI traced Trevor's offshore accounts and uncovered a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands holding $12 million money siphoned from client trust funds over 4 years. The account had been opened under an alias, but the login IP addresses used to access it traced directly to Trevor's personal laptop. Detective Calloway looked up from her notes. "We've also confirmed the ownership records for the Mercedes S-Class that was pushed into the river," she said. "It's registered under Trevor's name. However, you're listed as co-owner and co-signer. You guaranteed the loan in 2020. Agent Cole gave a slight nod. That detail helped us. As co-owner, we accessed maintenance records, GPS tracking logs, and insurance files without needing additional warrants. He flipped a page. The GPS data confirms the vehicle traveled from Trevor's Manhattan residence to your private dock that night. and Trevor's phone remained inside the vehicle until just before it entered the water. I closed my eyes. He had orchestrated every step. He drove the car to my dock intentionally. He wanted me to be the first witness. He wanted my location, my property, my proximity to the vehicle to frame me. "Why my house?" I asked quietly. Agent Cole's expression hardened. "Because optics matter. Geography matters. He wanted you tied to the scene. When law enforcement recovered the safe containing forged documents bearing your signature, the narrative would write itself." Father pushes car into river to destroy evidence. The room fell silent. Thomas broke it. So, the embezzlement, the forged signatures, the staged river incident, it was all part of one coordinated plan. Agent Cole nodded once. Yes, Trevor was constructing a long-term strategy. If Franklin were arrested and convicted, his 65% controlling stake would be forfeited. Trevor would assume full ownership of a company valued in the hundreds of millions. I felt physically ill. It wasn't just theft, it was conquest. Agent Cole leaned forward, folding his hands. Trevor is intelligent, charismatic. He has positioned himself publicly as a whistleblower. The media narrative favors him. If this goes to trial, his legal team will attempt to portray you as a bitter patriarch clinging to power. Jonathan nodded grimly. He'll weaponize emotion. The strongest case, Agent Cole continued, would be a direct confession, on record. I looked up slowly. "You're suggesting I confront him?" "Yes," Cole said, "in a controlled environment, somewhere private, somewhere he feels safe enough to lower his guard." Detective Calloway unfolded a map across the table. "We need a location with emotional leverage." I stared at the map for a long moment. Then memory surfaced. A cabin in the woods. Lake Placid. Summers when Trevor was 10, 12, 14. Fishing at dawn. Campfires. The place where he once told me I was his hero. "I know where," I said quietly. All eyes turned toward me. Lake Placid one continued. "The cabin." Agent Cole studied me carefully. "Are you certain you can handle that?" I met his gaze steadily. "I know my son," I said. "That place carries weight for him. It's the only place where he ever showed vulnerability." Cole nodded slowly. "We'll wire the property in advance. Hidden cameras, directional microphones. We'll monitor from a distance." Jonathan added, "You'll need to keep him talking. Ask open-ended questions. Let him explain." I exhaled slowly. "I'll get him to talk." Thomas leaned forward. "He trusts you there. Or, at least I said he remembers who he used to be there." Agent Cole folded the map. "Then that's our plan." The war room fell quiet. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about confrontation. I would look my son in the eyes, and he would either confess or confirm beyond doubt who he had become. Lake Placid, I repeated softly. The only place left where Trevor might still have a conscience. And perhaps the only place where I could finally face the truth. Before driving to Lake Placid, I allowed myself to drift backward. I sat alone in my living room, the house heavy with silence, a single photograph in my hands. I had taken it down from the mantel that morning. The edges were worn, the colors softened by 3 decades of sunlight, but the image was still clear. Helena stood on the dock, one arm wrapped around Trevor. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old. He held up a small trout with both hands, grinning, as if he had just conquered the world. Helena's smile was warm, radiant, the same smile that had once steadied every storm in my life. And there I was, beside them, my hand resting proudly on Trevor's shoulder, looking at my family as if nothing beyond that dock could ever matter, because nothing did. It was the summer of 1993, 2 full weeks at the cabin near Lake Placid. No phones, no clients, no market reports, just pine trees, lake water, and the 3 of us. I closed my eyes and the memory returned in waves. Trevor had been small then, his voice bright, his hands soft and uncalloused. Every morning, we rose before dawn and walked to the dock while mist hovered over the lake. I taught him how to bait a hook without flinching, how to cast properly, how to sit in silence and wait. Patience, I had told him, was part of strength. One morning, he had looked up at me, his eyes wide and sincere. "Dad," he said, "you're my hero." I laughed at the time, embarrassed by the weight of the word. "I'm just your father," I replied, ruffling his hair. He shook his head, stubborn even then. "No? You know everything?" The memory tightened something in my chest. I had believed him. That night by the fireplace, rain drummed steadily against the cabin roof. Helena wrapped Trevor in a wool blanket and pulled him close as flames flickered across the stone hearth. "You know what matters most?" she asked him gently. What Trevor had replied. "Honor," she said. "More than money, more than success. doing what's right even when no one is watching. Trevor had nodded solemnly. I'll remember. Helena kissed his forehead. I know you will. Later, after Trevor had fallen asleep, Helena rested her head against my shoulder. He's going to be a good man, she said. I had believed that too. Now, 30 years later, I stared at the photograph and wondered when that promise fractured. When the boy who called me his hero became the man who orchestrated his mother's death and attempted to bury me beneath his crimes. Where had that child gone? The drive north took 5 hours. I left before sunrise. The city was still half asleep, skyscrapers fading into morning haze as I merged onto EI-87. Gradually, concrete gave way to forest. Mountains rose in the distance like silent witnesses. By midday, the rain began. It fell hard, thick sheets striking the windshield, blurring the road into streaks of gray. The wipers fought to keep pace. Visibility dropped. The asphalt glistened dangerously. It was the same kind of rain that had fallen the night Helena died. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. For a moment, I felt as though time had folded back on itself. Road slick beneath tires, water distorting the world beyond the glass. Focus, I told myself. By the time I reached the outskirts of Lake Placid, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle. Pine trees lined the road, their scent faint but familiar. I arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. The cabin stood exactly as it had decades ago, small weathered cedar siding, tall pines framing the structure like guardians. The porch boards were darker with age, but the shape of the place was unchanged. I parked and remained seated for a moment, staring at it. This was where we had been whole. Agent Marcus Cole and his team had arrived earlier. Their unmarked van was parked discreetly down the road. Surveillance equipment had been installed, micro cameras in the living room, audio recorders embedded within walls and ceiling beams. Every angle covered. Cole approached my car as I stepped out. You ready? He asked. His voice was steady, professional. I nodded, though my palms were damp. You'll have 30 minutes, he said. We need him talking. We need admissions about the breaks, the embezzlement, the forged signatures, the river. Can you get him there? I'll do what I have to, I answered. Cole studied my face, perhaps measuring whether grief would overpower resolve. We're monitoring everything. If it escalates, we intervene. I nodded once more. The air was cold and wet as I walked toward the cabin. Each step onto the porch boards echoed faintly. I raised my hand and knocked. Silence. Only wind in the trees and the faint patter of rain. Then footsteps approached from inside. The door opened. Trevor stood there. For a moment, I barely recognized him. His face was pale drawn, cheeks hollowed by stress or sleeplessness. Dark circles framed bloodshot eyes. His expensive suits had once tailored him sharply. Now he wore a simple jacket that hung loosely on his thinner frame. He looked like a man unraveling. We stood facing each other, father and son, separated not by wood and air, but by betrayal, death, and ambition. Neither of us spoke. Memories collided with reality, the 8-year-old holding a trout, and the 38-year-old architect of destruction. Trevor broke the silence first. You found this place, he asked. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual executive polish. I stepped inside without answering immediately. It was never hard to find, I said quietly. It's where we used to come when things mattered. His jaw tightened. The cabin interior smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The fireplace remained in the same place. The old wooden table still stood near the window overlooking the lake. For a brief, fragile second, it almost felt like the past had returned, but the cameras hidden in the walls reminded me why I was here. Trevor closed the door behind me. I didn't think you'd come, he said. You called, I replied evenly. You said you wanted to talk. He ran a hand through his hair. You shouldn't have brought the FBI into this. I held his gaze. You shouldn't have cut your mother's brakes. The words landed between us like shattered glass. Trevor's expression flickered anger, fear, something else. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. I stepped further into the room. I know about Eddie Torres, I continued calmly. I know about the $15,000. I know about the $5 million she discovered. And I know about the $47 million you moved offshore. His breathing changed slightly quicker. You think they'll believe you? He asked. They already have evidence, I replied. Silence stretched. Rain tapped softly against the cabin windows. You could have come to me, I said softer now. You could have told me you were in trouble. We would have fixed it. His eyes darkened. You never would have understood. I understood more than you think I said. His shoulders slumped for a fraction of a second. The boy who once called me his hero seemed to flicker somewhere behind his eyes. You were going to send me to prison, I said quietly. You staged the river. You planted the safe. You forged my name." Trevor didn't deny it immediately. Instead, he stared past me toward the lake beyond the window. "I built something bigger than you ever imagined," he said finally. "You were holding the company back." "With integrity?" I asked. "With control?" he snapped. The mask cracked. "Mom would have destroyed everything," he continued, voice rising. "She didn't understand what was at stake. She understood right from wrong," I said. His jaw clenched. "You think this world rewards honor," he said bitterly. "It rewards power." "And so you killed her?" I asked, voice steady. The question hung heavy in the air. Trevor looked at me, really looked at me for the first time since I'd arrived. His eyes were glassy. "She wasn't supposed to die," he said quietly. There it was, a fracture. Rain intensified briefly, drumming harder against the roof. I didn't move, and the company I pressed, the money. He exhaled sharply. "I deserved it," he muttered. "You deserved to steal." "I deserved control," he said. The boy in the photograph was gone. In his place stood a man consumed by ambition. I felt something inside me settle, not relief, not anger, clarity. "You still could have chosen differently," I said. Trevor's expression shifted again, regret perhaps, or realization that the trap had already closed. Outside hidden microphones captured every word. "You came here to trap me," he said slowly. "No," I replied. "I came here because this is the last place you ever told the truth." He said nothing. The lake beyond the window was dark and still. For a moment, we stood suspended between memory and consequence. Then Trevor looked at me exhausted. "So what happens now?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Now," I said quietly, "the truth does." I stepped fully inside the cabin, and the door closed with a dull thud behind me. For a moment, I felt the weight of it, wood ceiling shut. Rain muffled the outside world, reduced to a distant hush. It was just the two of us now. The interior looked almost unchanged. The same worn wooden floor, scratched and dulled by decades of summers. The same stone fireplace rising in the center of the room, dark and empty now. A small kitchen still tucked into the corner cabinet, slightly crooked from age. But the warmth that had once lived here was gone. The air felt stale, cold. The shadows seemed thicker, as if the cabinet itself were holding its breath. Trevor stood by the window with his back to me, watching the rain streak down the glass. His shoulders were tense, hands shoved into his pockets. We said nothing. The silence between us wasn't ordinary silence. It was dense, packed with 3 years of grief lies, suspicion, and the unspoken knowledge of what he had done. Everything that had shattered our family hung in the air like smoke. Finally, Trevor turned. His face looked drawn in the dim light, hollowed, guarded. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. "I had to," I replied. He gestured toward the couch. "Sit." I moved slowly across the room, every step deliberate. My legs felt heavier than they should have, as though I were walking towards something irreversible. I lowered myself onto the couch. Trevor sat across from me in the old armchair, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together. We were only a few feet apart. It felt like miles. I studied him, really studied him, searching for something familiar. The curve of his jaw, the shape of his eyes, any trace of the boy who once held up a trout on this very dock and grinned at me like I was invincible. But all I saw was a stranger. I leaned back slowly and let out a long breath. When I spoke, I made my voice quiet. Tired. "I'm done, Trevor." He frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "I'm done fighting," I said. "The board suspended me. The media's already convicted me. My own attorney says the case against me, at least publicly, is nearly impossible to reverse. Even if we prove the signatures were forged, even if we prove I didn't touch $1 of that money, the damage is done." I rubbed my face with both hands, letting exhaustion show. 35 years building that company," I murmured, "and it's gone. My name is ruined. My legacy is finished. I don't have the strength to keep fighting." Trevor was watching me carefully now, not emotionally, analytically. "What are you saying?" he asked, though. I could see he already sensed it. I met his eyes. "I'm saying you win." The words hung in the room. "I'll transfer my shares," I continued, "all 65%. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. You'll have full control. The company, the board, everything." He didn't move. "I'll leave," I added. "New York, the business world. I'll disappear if that's what it takes. I just want it over." For a few seconds, Trevor simply stared at me, searching for deception. Then I saw it. The shift. The tension in his shoulders eased. His jaw loosened. The faintest trace of a smile touched his lips. He believed me. "You're serious?" he asked. "I am. I get everything. Yes. He leaned back into the chair and exhaled slowly. The triumph in his eyes was unmistakable. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was there, quiet satisfaction like a chess player finally cornering his opponent. I'm glad you're finally seeing reason, he said. I nodded slowly. There's just one thing, I said. His eyes narrowed slightly. What? I want to understand. He stiffened. Understand what? Why? I said softly, before I walk away. Before I give you everything I've ever built. I need to know why you did this. Trevor's jaw tightened. You wouldn't understand. Try me. He stood abruptly pacing toward the fireplace. He stared into the empty hearth as if something there might answer for him. Do you know what it's like, he said, his voice hard, being your son? I didn't interrupt. Growing up with your name attached to mine, he continued. Everywhere I went, school, college, business. Oh, you're Franklin Calloway's son. Like, that was my entire identity. He turned toward me, anger rising. You built an empire. Everyone worshipped you. Investors, employees, the press. You were flawless, brilliant, untouchable. I was never flawless, I said quietly. You didn't have to be, he snapped. The world saw you that way. He ran a hand through his hair. I was 28 when you made me CEO. 28. Do you know how absurd that is? No one saw me as capable. They saw me as your project. I believed in you, I said. That was the problem, he shot back. You believed in me as your successor, not as my own person. He began pacing again. Every board meeting, every client introduction. This is my son. He'll take over someday. Do you know what that does to someone? It means you're never allowed to fail, never allowed to stumble, never allowed to be anything less than you. The rain tapped steadily against the windows. I never expected perfection, I said. You didn't have to say it, he replied bitterly. It was in everything. He stopped pacing and faced me. So, yes, he continued, voice lower, now darker. I took the money. The confession came almost casually. I moved it. I funneled it offshore. I spent it. He laughed softly without humor. Macau, Monaco, Vegas. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just your son. I was powerful. And when it wasn't enough, I asked quietly. I took more, he said flatly. And when I realized the hole was too deep to climb out of, I made sure someone else would fall in first. You framed me. He didn't deny it. You were always the golden figure, he said. So I decided to make you the villain. I held his gaze. And your mother. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his eyes. Then it hardened. She was going to ruin everything he said. She hired someone. She knew. She was going to tell me. Yes. And that was unacceptable to you. She would have destroyed the company, he said. She would have saved it, I replied. Trevor's jaw tightened. She was going to the police, he said quietly. I couldn't let that happen. So, you cut her brake lines. Silence. He didn't speak, but he didn't deny it either. The absence of denial said everything. Something inside me fractured, but I kept my face calm. I understand, I said gently. He blinked, startled. You felt trapped, I continued. You thought you had no way out. He stared at me, confusion flickering through his expression. I'm not excusing it, I added, but I see how you got there. He swallowed. For the first time since I'd arrived, the mask slipped. You don't know what it's like to feel small your entire life, he muttered. I know what it's like to build from nothing, I replied, and to be terrified of losing it. We sat in silence again. Rain whispered against the cabin walls. I leaned forward slightly. I have one last question, I said. Trevor's eyes narrowed cautiously. After that, I signed everything. The shares, the control, all of it. He hesitated. What's the question? I looked directly into his eyes, the same eyes that once searched mine, for approval, for guidance. Was it worth it, I asked quietly. All of it. The money, the power, the lies, Mom. The room seemed to shrink. Trevor didn't answer immediately. His breathing slowed. His gaze shifted just slightly. And I waited. If you're still here, type truth in the comments, so I know you're standing with me. We're moments away from the turning point that changes everything. Quick reminder, parts of this story are dramatized for powerful storytelling. If it's not your style, you're free to step away. But if you stay, brace yourself. Wherever you're watching from, take care, and thank you for walking this journey with me. I drew in a slow, steady breath, though my chest felt like it was caving in. Trevor! My voice almost failed me, but I forced the words out. Did you take your mother's life? The question settled between us like a blade laid across a table. For a long moment, he didn't move. He didn't blink. He just stared at me, his face unreadable, his eyes dark and distant, as if I were asking about a stranger. Then slowly the corner of his mouth lifted. It wasn't the crooked grin he wore as a child when he'd been caught sneaking cookies from the kitchen. It wasn't the anxious half-smile he used to give before a big presentation. This smile was hollow, cold. "Yes," he said. Just one word. It struck me harder than any shout ever could. My lungs tightened. The air seemed to vanish from the room. I had known somewhere in the part of me that had stopped sleeping 3 years ago, but hearing it spoken aloud made it irreversible. Why, I whispered. Trevor leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms as though settling into a casual conversation. "Because Mom was too righteous," he said flatly. "She found out about the $5 million, and instead of talking to me like a mother, she hired a private investigator." His tone sharpened with irritation. She gathered documents, bank records, wire transfers. She was planning to go to the police the next morning. He shook his head as though she had inconvenienced him. She was going to ruin everything, he continued. My career, my future, over $5 million. I stared at him, my hands trembling in my lap. $5 million was only the beginning, he added almost defensively. I had plans, expansion, international acquisitions. That money was leverage. "So you stopped her," I said. "I had to." There was no hesitation in his voice. "I hired Eddie Torres, $15,000 in cash. He cut the brake lines carefully, not enough for immediate failure, just enough to weaken them. I waited for the right conditions." His eyes flicked toward the rain outside the cabin window. A rainy night. She always drove too confidently in the rain. My stomach twisted. "She lost control on Route 9, he went on. Hit the utility pole. The airbag deployed, but the impact was fatal. By the time paramedics arrived, he let the sentence hang. He spoke as if describing quarterly losses. "And you let me believe it was an accident," I said, my voice breaking. "For 3 years I blamed the weather, the road, myself." "It was ruled an accident," he replied sharply. "No one questioned it. Torres disposed of the tools. I paid him. The trail disappeared." He looked directly at me. "You mourned. You buried her. You moved forward. That's what I needed." The calmness in his delivery made something inside me fracture. "And that wasn't enough," I said hoarsely. "You didn't stop at $5 million. Trevor's lips curved faintly again. "Why would I?" he said. "With her gone, no one was watching closely. You were drowning in grief. The board trusted me. I had control of operations." He stood pacing slowly across the room. "I funneled funds through shell corporations, opened offshore accounts in the Caymans, structured layered transfers. I even perfected your signature." He laughed softly. "It took practice, but I got there." "You forged my name," I said. "On everything," he confirmed. "Every authorization, every approval, every transaction." He stopped near the fireplace, hands resting on the mantel. "And when the numbers got too large to conceal, I pivoted." My pulse quickened. "I staged the river," he said almost proudly. "Drove the Mercedes to your dock, pushed it in, left the safe inside. I knew you'd find it. I knew you'd call 911. Optics dad. You were the grieving founder with access and motive." He turned toward me, eyes gleaming. "If everything had unfolded cleanly, you'd be under indictment right now. The controlling shares forfeited, and I'd have 65% ownership of a company worth hundreds of millions." The arrogance in his voice cut deeper than the confession itself. "And the family I asked quietly, the years here, the promises, the nights by this fire." Trevor's expression didn't soften. "Family is leverage," he said. "Attachment is weakness." The words echoed against the cabin walls. "I needed control," he continued. "You and Mom stood in the way." He looked at me without flinching. "So I removed you." For a second I thought my knees would give out. I rose slowly instead, gripping the back of the couch for support. Tears burned down my face, but I did not wipe them away. "You know what hurts most?" I asked. He watched me warily now. "It's not the money," I said. "It's not the lies. It's not even what you did to your mother." I met his eyes. "It's that I failed you." His brow twitched slightly. "I failed to teach you that honor matters, that integrity outlives power, that wealth without conscience is rot." For the first time, something flickered across his face. Uncertainty. Guilt. But it hardened quickly. "You didn't fail," he said quietly. "I just chose differently." "No," I replied. "You chose wrong." The air in the cabin shifted. "And now," I said softly, "you'll face the consequences." Trevor frowned. "Yes, what are you talking about?" I didn't answer. Instead, I held his gaze steadily. Then the front door exploded inward. The sound was thunderous. FBI agents flooded into the cabin in coordinated motion, Agent Marcus Cole at the front, Detective Sarah Caldwell just behind him. Tactical officers spread outward with practiced precision. Trevor Calloway, Cole's voice rang out. You are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and the unlawful orchestration of your mother's death. You have the right to remain silent. Trevor staggered back, his face draining of color. What his voice cracked. What did you do? His eyes darted around the room, finally noticing the small lens near the ceiling beam, the subtle glint behind a bookshelf, the microphone embedded near the fireplace. Understanding dawned. I stepped forward, my voice steady now. I asked you for the truth, I said, and you gave it to me. He shook his head in disbelief. No, he muttered. No, you. Every word I continued calmly. The 5 million. Eddie Torres, the brake lines, the river, the forgery, the frame. Agents moved in, securing his wrists. You set me up, he whispered, staring at me as if seeing a stranger. I gave you a choice, I replied quietly. You made it. Handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Trevor's breathing grew uneven as the weight of it crashed over him. You said you were done fighting, he said hoarsely. I am, I answered. I'm done fighting alone. Agent Cole stepped forward. We have your full confession on audio and video, he said evenly. You'll have the opportunity to consult counsel. Trevor's gaze remained locked on mine as they guided him toward the door. Shock had replaced arrogance. For the first time since I'd arrived, he looked small, not powerful, not brilliant, just small. As agents led him out into the rain, I stood in the center of the cabin, listening to the sound of boots on wet wood. The trap had closed. The truth had spoken in his own voice. And the boy who once called me his hero was gone, replaced by a man who would now answer for every choice he had made. Trevor was led away in handcuffs, and when the sound of boots on wet wood faded into the distance, I was left alone in the cabin. For several seconds, I stood frozen in the center of the room, my entire body trembling. Rain streaked down the window panes, blurring the red and blue reflections of FBI vehicles outside. Through the glass, I watched them guide him toward the waiting car, his hands secured behind his back, his head lowered. He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't look back. He walked like a man who understood that the last illusion had finally collapsed. Agent Cole lingered near the door, giving me space. Detective Calloway was outside, issuing quiet instructions to her team. Their voices were distant, muffled by rain and wood. All I could hear was Trevor's voice. I don't need family. I never did. The words echoed in my mind, relentless, circling like a storm that would not pass. My knees gave way. I sank onto the couch and covered my face with my hands. The sobs came without warning, deep, wrenching, uncontrollable. I cried for Helena, for the woman who had loved fiercely and believed in goodness, who had died because she refused to look away from the truth. I cried for the boy Trevor had once been, the small hand in mine on the dock, the child who believed I knew everything. And I cried for the man he had become, a stranger, forged by ambition and resentment. Somewhere along the way, something had broken. I did not know where, and perhaps I never would. The days that followed blurred together in a strange, disorienting haze. The media shifted almost overnight. Headlines that had condemned me only days earlier now condemned him. The same networks that had replayed his press conference now replayed his arrest footage in endless loops. Trevor Calloway, the most cursed son in America. Panels of commentators dissected his confession. Psychologists speculated. Analysts debated greed, ego, narcissism. The narrative had flipped completely. He was no longer the courageous whistleblower. He was the villain. The board of directors convened an emergency session within 48 hours of his arrest. A formal letter arrived at my home, printed on company letterhead, and signed unanimously. It was an apology, direct, unambiguous. They admitted they had acted rashly in suspending me. They acknowledged their failure to wait for facts. They insisted that I return as chairman and CEO immediately. I read the letter twice, then I declined. I could not walk back into those offices as though nothing had happened. Every hallway would remind me of Trevor's manipulation. Every conference room would echo with the sound of trust misplaced. Instead, I asked Thomas Parker to assume the role of interim CEO. He resisted at first. He disliked visibility. He preferred quiet competence over public leadership. But I told him what the company needed now was steadiness and integrity, not charisma. He agreed. A week after Trevor's arrest, I began meeting with the victims. There were more than 200 of them. Retirees, small business owners, widows, couples who had entrusted us with their savings and futures. I met them in modest conference rooms and quiet cafes without cameras or press releases. I listened. Margaret Wilson was 70 years old. She sat across from me with trembling hands and eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She and her husband George had lost $340,000, their retirement fund. George was undergoing cancer treatment. "We believed in your company," she said softly. "We thought our money was safe." Her voice cracked on the word safe. I lowered my gaze. "I am deeply sorry," I told her. "There are no words sufficient for this." She nodded, clutching a tissue. "I know you didn't do it," she said, "but that doesn't bring the money back." I reached across the table and gently took her hand. "I will make this right," I said. "Every dollar Trevor took, I will fight to return it." She studied me, searching for certainty in my face. "Can you?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I will try." That night, I sat alone in my study, surrounded by financial statements and asset valuations Thomas had compiled. $47 million had been stolen. Insurance would cover a portion, but not enough. The company reserves could absorb some losses, but doing so would destabilize operations. I did the math carefully. If I liquidated my personal holdings, my home investment portfolio, and a substantial portion of my shares in Callaway Financial Group, I could raise approximately $110 million. It would cover the victims in full. It would leave me nearly stripped of personal wealth, but it would be right. And I stared at the figures for a long time. Then I picked up my phone. "Jonathan," I said. When my attorney answered, "I want to sell everything." There was silence on the other end. Everything he asked cautiously. My house, my portfolio, 40% of my company shares. I want the proceeds directed into a restitution fund. "Franklin," he said carefully, "that's your life's work. I know. You'll be left with very little. I know." Another pause. "Are you certain?" "Yes," I said. "It's what Helena would have done." He exhaled slowly. "All right, I'll begin the process." After I ended the call, I walked to the mantel and lifted the old photograph from Lake Placid. The edges were worn now, Helena's smile still radiant, Trevor small and grinning between us. We had looked unbreakable. I traced my finger over Helena's face. Then Trevor's. The boy in the photograph had no trace of calculation in his eyes, no shadow of ambition twisting into something darker. What had changed him? Was it pressure, expectation, or something we had failed to see entirely? I closed my eyes and let the tears fall again quietly this time. "Where did we go wrong, Helena?" I whispered into the empty room. The house offered no answer, only silence. Outside, the world continued markets opening headlines, cycling people moving forward with their lives. But inside that quiet space, I felt the weight of a question that would likely follow me for the rest of my days. I had chosen restitution. I had chosen to give back what was taken. It would not bring Helena back. It would not restore the son I once knew. But it was the only way I knew how to honor what we had once believed in. Honor. The word echoed in my memory, Helena's voice by the fire, telling a young boy that it mattered more than money. Perhaps it still did. Perhaps it always had. And perhaps in giving up everything I had built, I could salvage at least that. The next 6 months were the longest of my life. They did not pass in dramatic bursts. They moved slowly, deliberately, like a weight pressing down on my chest day after day. Every week I found myself in Jonathan Pierce's office, a sleek glass tower in downtown Manhattan, overlooking the river. From the outside, the building symbolized power and control. Inside it became a war room. Jonathan Agent Marcus Cole and I sat around a polished conference table, scattered with binders, forensic reports, financial charts, and deposition transcripts. We examined wire transfers line by line. We reviewed surveillance footage. We rehearsed testimony until the language felt mechanical. We built the case the only way truth can be built in court, brick by brick. Jonathan was relentless. In his late 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to dissect whatever they landed on, he had spent 3 decades dismantling white-collar defenses. He was meticulous, precise, and emotionally detached. But even he admitted this case was different. "Your son will have the best defense team money can hire," he said one afternoon, tapping his pen against a stack of documents. "They'll argue psychological strain, corporate pressure, diminished capacity. They'll try to reframe him as a product of impossible expectations." "Could it work?" I asked. Jonathan shook his head slowly. "Not with the recorded confession, not with Eddie Torres on the stand, not with Dr. Cooper's forensic breakdown of the digital signatures. The evidence is overwhelming." And he paused. "But juries are human, and humans are unpredictable. Eddie Torres had agreed to testify. He had been arrested the same night as Trevor, charged as an accessory in the orchestration of Helena's death. His attorney negotiated a deal full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence 5 years instead of 25. I did not like it. 5 years felt insufficient for the man who had physically cut the brake lines on my wife's car. But Agent Cole had been clear. Without Torres, he told me the homicide charge becomes significantly harder to prove. Justice sometimes demands compromise, and I wanted the truth on record, so I accepted the deal. The nights were the worst. Sleep abandoned me. Each time I closed my eyes, Trevor's face surfaced, but not the hardened expression from the cabin. I saw him at 8 years old standing on the dock, at 16 awkward and hopeful, at 28 nervous but ambitious. And I kept asking the same question. When did it begin? One night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, a memory surfaced with uncomfortable clarity. Trevor was 16. It was the summer of 2001, and he had just received his driver's license. Helena and I had given him a used Honda Civic, a modest gift, but one he treasured. A week later, I noticed $500 missing from my wallet. I confronted him gently. He denied it, but I saw the flicker in his eyes, the slight hesitation before he spoke, the way his fingers fidgeted. Helena wanted consequences. She argued for grounding him, taking the car away, enforcing real accountability. But I intervened. He's a good kid, I told her. Let's talk it through. We sat him down at the kitchen table. I spoke about trust, about honesty, about responsibility. He apologized, promised it wouldn't happen again. And I believed him. Now, lying in the darkness decades later, I wondered if that was the first fracture. If leniency had quietly planted something dangerous. Maybe stricter discipline would have changed him. Or maybe nothing would have. The truth is, I will never know. In February, Richard Lawson, Trevor's high-profile defense attorney, contacted Jonathan with a plea offer. Trevor would plead guilty to embezzlement and fraud. In exchange, the homicide-related charges connected to Helena would be dropped. He would serve 15 years instead of life. Jonathan called me immediately. It's a serious offer, he said. 15 years is not insignificant. No, I replied without hesitation. Franklin, consider the risks. Trials are volatile. No, I repeated firmer this time. The full truth goes to court. Jonathan was silent. I wanted on record, I continued. What he did to Helena, what he did to the clients, what he tried to do to me, I want it heard publicly. You understand the exposure, Jonathan asked quietly. Every detail will be dissected. Your family history, your parenting, everything. I understand, and you're prepared. I am. He exhaled slowly. All right, I'll decline the offer. Helena deserved more than a negotiated silence. The victims deserved more than partial acknowledgement, and Trevor needed to face the entirety of what he had done. The trial date was set April 15th, 2024. The day before, I sat alone in my study reviewing my testimony once more. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the ticking of the clock felt amplified. Then the doorbell rang. I walked to the front door and found a courier holding a small envelope. Delivery for Franklin Calloway. I signed for it and closed the door. The envelope was plain, white, unremarkable, but the handwriting on the front stopped me cold. Trevor's. I recognized it instantly. The angular strokes, the slight forward slant, the pressure marks at the end of each letter. My heart began to pound. I carried the envelope back to my study and sat down at my desk. I placed it carefully in front of me. It felt heavier than it should have. A letter from Trevor, sent from the detention center where he awaited trial. I turned it over slowly, examining the sealed flap. For a moment, I considered tearing it open, immediately demanding to know what he had written. An apology, an explanation, another manipulation. But a deeper part of me hesitated. For months I had listened to evidence, confessions, financial records, forensic analysis. Did I have the strength to read his words? The room felt smaller suddenly. I imagined his voice shaping each sentence. I imagined him crafting language carefully, perhaps even strategically. Was this remorse? Or one final attempt to control the narrative? The envelope rested beneath my hand. I stared at it for a long time. Tomorrow, the trial would begin. Cameras would line the courthouse steps. Reporters would speculate. Jurors would take their seats. Tomorrow, everything would become public record. But tonight, in the quiet of my study, I held something private. A final message from my son. Unopened. Uncertain, I closed my eyes, briefly steadying my breath. Part of me wanted to hear him. Another part feared that whatever was written inside would only reopen wounds that had barely begun to scar. The envelope remained sealed on the desk in front of me. The trial was less than 24 hours away, and in my hands I held one last unknown. On the morning the trial began, I woke before dawn. 5 o'clock. The house was still wrapped in that fragile silence that exists just before the city stirs. But inside me, there was no calm. My chest felt heavy as though the air itself had thickened overnight. I had barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, Helena's face appeared laughing in the kitchen, brushing rain from her hair, turning to smile at me. Then Trevor's voice would cut through the memory cold and measured inside that cabin. I don't need family. I rose slowly from bed and stood for a moment in the dim light, steadying myself. Today everything would unfold in public. Today there would be no more shadows. I dressed carefully in a dark charcoal suit and a plain navy tie. Nothing flashy, nothing theatrical, just solemn. Jonathan Pierce arrived at 7 sharp. We drove downtown in near silence. Manhattan was already alive. News vans clustered near the courthouse satellite dishes, angled skyward. Reporters rehearsing into microphones. Protesters held signs, some condemning Trevor, others arguing about corporate greed and accountability. The crowd parted reluctantly as security escorted us through. Inside the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse, the atmosphere felt charged. The courtroom was packed, standing room only. Victims filled the benches, their expressions tense and expectant. Journalists lined the back wall, notebooks poised. The air hummed with whispered speculation. At precisely 9 o'clock, Judge Patricia Harmon entered. She was a woman in her 60s, silver hair neatly pinned back posture, rigid gaze sharp. When she struck the gavel, the room snapped to attention. The people of the state of New York versus Trevor Franklin Calloway, she announced. This court is now in session. Then the side door opened. Bailiffs escorted Trevor into the courtroom. He wore an orange detention jumpsuit. His wrists were cuffed in front of him. He had lost noticeable weight, his cheeks hollow, his frame thinner, his once polished executive appearance replaced by something stark and diminished. For a brief second, our eyes met. There was no anger in his expression now, only calculation and something else I could not name. He looked away first. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Lisa Hammond, rose from her seat. She was composed, controlled, and precise, a woman known for dismantling financial crime cases with surgical clarity. Your Honor. She began, turning toward the jury. The people will prove that the defendant Trevor Calloway orchestrated a deliberate multi-year conspiracy. Her voice carried across the room, steady and unwavering. He embezzled $47 million from client trust funds. He paid $2.3 million in bribes to government officials to conceal his activities. He committed $8 million in tax fraud. And most gravely, he arranged the death of his own mother, Helena Calloway, to prevent exposure of his crimes. A ripple of murmurs moved through the gallery. Judge Harmon struck the gavel once. Lisa continued. The defendant then attempted to frame his own father, Franklin Calloway, by forging documents, planting evidence, and staging a vehicle disposal designed to implicate him. She paused. The people have brought 73 counts, including first-degree murder, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The weight of the numbers settled heavily in the room. We will present forensic analysis, financial tracing witness testimony, and a recorded confession in which the defendant admits in his own words to these crimes. She turned toward Trevor. The evidence will show that Trevor Calloway is not a whistleblower. He is a calculated criminal who chose wealth and power over conscience, family, and human life. She sat. Trevor's defense attorney, Richard Lawson, stood next. Tall, impeccably dressed, with a calm, almost reassuring demeanor, he approached the jury box with measured steps. Ladies and gentlemen, he began smoothly. My client is not a monster. He clasped his hands lightly. He is a man who made grave mistakes under immense pressure. Yes, Trevor Calloway mismanaged funds. Yes, he made decisions he now regrets. He paused for emphasis. But the prosecution's narrative that he deliberately caused his mother's death is built on circumstantial evidence and incentivized testimony. He gestured subtly toward the prosecution table. And the so-called confession. It was elicited through manipulation and entrapment by a father consumed by anger and betrayal. A few jurors exchanged glances. We will show Lawson concluded that Trevor acted out of fear and desperation, not malice. He returned to his seat. Judge Harmon nodded. The prosecution may call its first witness. Lisa Hammond stood. The people call Edward Torres. Eddie Torres entered hesitantly. He appeared smaller than I remembered, nervous. His hands trembled slightly as he took the oath. On direct examination, he recounted meeting Trevor in August 2020, the payment, $15,000 in cash, the instructions. "He told you what to do?" Lisa asked. "Yes, ma'am." "What specifically?" "To weaken the brake lines on a Honda Accord, make it look like normal wear." "Did you know who owned the vehicle?" Torres swallowed. "Not at the time. I found out after I saw the news about Mrs. Calloway." "And why are you testifying today?" He looked down. "Because I can't live with it. What I did was wrong." The courtroom was silent. Next, Dr. Helen Cooper took the stand. Small, composed, clinical. She explained the forensic analysis of the signatures found on financial authorization documents. These were not handwritten signatures, she testified, projecting enlarged images onto a courtroom screen. They were digitally reproduced. She pointed to magnified samples. Here you see pixelation. Here the absence of natural ink pressure variation. Here identical repetition patterns consistent with scanned imagery. "In your professional opinion," Lisa asked, "these signatures were fabricated." The jurors leaned forward, studying the screen. Then Agent Marcus Cole took the stand. He detailed the financial investigation wire transfers, traced through layered shell corporations, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands containing the $12 million, and digital access logs linking the accounts to Trevor's laptop. Agent Cole, Lisa said, "Please explain the significance of the Mercedes S-Class discovered in the Hudson River." The 2020 Mercedes license plate 7XPJ-492 was registered to Trevor Calloway, Cole stated. Franklin Calloway was listed as co-owner and co-signer on the loan. And how did that affect the investigation? It allowed us to access vehicle maintenance records, insurance documentation, and GPS tracking data. What did the GPS data reveal? That the vehicle was driven from Trevor Calloway's Manhattan residence to Franklin Calloway's private dock on the night in question. Additionally, Trevor's cell phone remained inside the vehicle during that time frame. A quiet gasp rippled through the gallery. Then Agent Cole introduced the recording from the Lake Placid cabin. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as the audio played. Trevor's voice echoed through the chamber, measured unmistakable. "I don't need family. I only need money and power." The words struck like a hammer. Several jurors visibly reacted. A woman in the gallery began to cry softly. When the recording ended, the silence felt heavier than before. Lisa Hammond stood once more. The people called Thomas Parker, and as Thomas rose from his seat to approach the witness stand, I felt the final pieces of truth moving into place. Thomas Parker rose slowly from his seat and walked toward the witness stand. Even from where I sat, I could see the tension in him, the slight tremor in his shoulders, the careful way he held himself upright. He wore a simple gray suit, understated, and neat, his tie perfectly centered. There was no theatrics in him, no performance, only gravity. He took the oath, sat down, and folded his hands in front of him. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Hammond approached with steady composure. "Mr. Parker, please state your full name and occupation for the record." "Thomas Edward Parker," he replied. "Chief Operating Officer of Calloway Financial Group. I've held that position for 15 years. And your relationship to the defendant? For 3 years, Trevor Calloway was my direct superior. Prior to that, I reported to his father, Franklin Calloway. I was asked to mentor Trevor when he became CEO. Lisa nodded. "What was your objective in mentoring him?" "To help him lead responsibly," Thomas said quietly, "with integrity." There was a slight pause before Lisa continued. "During your time working under Mr. Calloway, did you observe anything unusual?" Thomas inhaled slowly. "Yes. Approximately 2 years ago, I began noticing financial inconsistencies. Large transfers routed through entities that didn't align with our internal documentation." "Can you elaborate?" "Shell corporations," Thomas said. "Entities registered offshore or in states with minimal disclosure requirements. The transactions didn't match our official ledgers." "What happened when you raised these concerns?" "I approached Trevor directly. He told me the transfers were part of confidential strategic projects." "Did that explanation satisfy you?" "No," Thomas answered firmly. "The more I reviewed the records, the more it appeared the funds were being siphoned." Lisa handed him a binder. "Mr. Parker, do you recognize these documents?" "Yes," he said, flipping carefully through the pages. "These are copies of credit card statements and international transaction reports recovered from internal archives." "What did you discover?" Thomas's jaw tightened slightly. Trevor was living well beyond his executive compensation. I discovered documented gambling losses totaling nearly $10 million over 4 years. A ripple moved through the courtroom. In one documented evening in McCall, Thomas continued, he lost approximately $3 million. The murmuring grew louder. Order Judge Harmon commanded, striking the gavel. Lisa resumed calmly. And these expenditures they funded legitimately? No, Thomas replied. They were drawn from client trust funds, meaning money entrusted to our firm for safekeeping and fiduciary management. Lisa lifted another document. Did you discover any additional personal expenditures? Yes. Thomas hesitated for a fraction of a second. Trevor was paying approximately $20,000 per month to support a private escort in New York City. Apartment lease, vehicle, luxury purchases, all funded through diverted client assets. The silence that followed was heavy. Lisa approached the evidence table and retrieved a printed email. Mr. Parker, please review this document. Thomas read quickly. I recognize it. Who authored it? Trevor Calloway. And to whom was it addressed? Eddie Torres. Please read the subject line aloud. Thomas's voice remained steady. Final payment, delivery confirmed. Lisa handed him a second page and the body of the email. Thomas read carefully. Eddie, the problem will be handled as discussed. $15,000 cash is agreed. Make sure there's nothing that can be traced back. I need this done clean. Gasps echoed across the courtroom. Judge Harmon struck the gavel repeatedly. Order in this court. When quiet returned, Lisa spoke again. Mr. Parker, in your understanding what was the problem referenced in this email, Thomas turned slightly toward the defense table. It referred to Helena Calloway. A visible tension rippled through Trevor's posture. Explain, Lisa said. Helena had uncovered evidence of embezzlement. She confronted Trevor and informed him she intended to notify authorities. Were you aware of this confrontation? Yes. Approximately 2 weeks before her death, I overheard an argument in Trevor's office. Describe it. Thomas swallowed. Helena told him she had proof. She said she would not allow him to continue stealing from clients. Trevor warned her that going to the police would be a mistake. What were his exact words? He told her, Thomas said slowly, if you do this, you'll regret it. A hush fell over the room. Did you report this exchange to anyone? Thomas's voice softened. Number one, I believed it was an emotional dispute. I never imagined it would escalate. He paused. I regret that every day. Lisa shifted direction. Mr. Parker, did anyone attempt to influence your testimony? Yes. Who? Trevor's legal team. Be specific. 3 months ago, I was approached with an offer of $500,000 in exchange for declining to testify or claiming memory gaps. And how did you respond? I refused, Thomas said firmly. I told them I would not lie. Helena Calloway deserved the truth. Lisa nodded, her expression resolute. No further questions. Defense attorney Richard Lawson rose slowly. His cross-examination was controlled, but lacked force. He attempted to suggest Thomas harbored resentment for being passed over for CEO. He implied financial motives. Thomas remained composed. I served the company for 15 years, he replied calmly. If I had wanted power, I had opportunities. This is not about promotion. It is about accountability. After 20 minutes, Lawson sat down. Judge Harmon looked toward the prosecution. Does the people have additional witnesses? Lisa Hammond rose. Yes, Your Honor. The people call Franklin Calloway. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I rose slowly from my seat. My heart pounded not from fear, but from the weight of finality. Every step toward the witness stand felt deliberate, irreversible. I passed Trevor without looking directly at him. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. As I sat down, I felt the eyes of the courtroom upon me, jurors, victims, journalists. This was the moment, not as a businessman, not as a father, but as a witness, and the truth at last would be spoken in full. I rose when my name was called and walked toward the witness stand. Each step felt deliberate, heavy with consequence. When I reached the front of the courtroom, I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. The words felt larger than ritual. They felt like a reckoning. The courtroom fell into a profound silence. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, jurors, reporters, strangers, victims, and at the defense table, my son. Trevor sat in his orange prison uniform, hands folded in front of him. His posture was rigid, his expression eerily blank. He did not look away when our eyes met. Neither did I. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Hammond approached the stand with quiet authority. "Mr. Calloway," she began gently, "thank you for being here. I understand this is difficult." I nodded. My throat felt tight. "Before we begin," she said, "I need to ask you something important. Do you love your son?" The question struck harder than any accusation. I swallowed. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "I love my son." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Lisa let the answer settle before asking her next question. "Then why are you testifying against him?" I turned slightly, looking at Trevor, before returning my gaze to her. "Because loving someone," I said, "slowly does not mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. I love my son, but justice matters more than shielding him from what he has done." Judge Harmon tapped her gavel, lightly restoring order, as whispers spread. Lisa continued, "Mr. Calloway, please tell the court what occurred on the night of October 2023 at the Hudson River dock." I drew in a slow breath. I was at my private dock, approximately half a mile south of Riverside Marina. It was around 9 o'clock. I heard an engine approaching at high speed. As I looked up and saw a black Mercedes S-Class license plate 7XPJ492 driving without headlights. My hands tightened on the edge of the witness stand. The vehicle crashed through the guardrail and plunged into the river. The courtroom was silent. I recognized the license plate immediately, I continued. "It belonged to my son." "What did you do?" Lisa asked. "I took my fishing boat and rowed toward the vehicle. I called 911. When I reached the car, the engine was still running, the doors were open, but there was no one inside. And then," I paused. I looked toward the shoreline. I saw Trevor standing there, watching. A stir moved through the jury. Our eyes met. Then he turned and ran into the trees. Moments later, I heard another engine start. A dark sedan drove away. Trevor's jaw tightened slightly, but he remained silent. Lisa approached the evidence table. "Mr. Calloway, when authorities recovered the vehicle, a safe was discovered in the trunk. Can you describe what was inside?" "Yes." My voice trembled, but I forced it steady. There were 3 USB drives, a handwritten notebook detailing financial transactions, $50,000 in cash, and an envelope labeled Helena Proof. The name caught in my throat. Inside that envelope, I continued carefully, was an audio recording. My wife had recorded a private conversation with Trevor 1 week before her death. "And what was discussed in that recording?" Lisa asked. She confronted him about embezzling $5 million from client trust accounts. She told him she intended to report him to authorities. I closed my eyes, briefly hearing Helena's voice again in my memory. "And how did the defendant respond?" "He told her," I said slowly, "Mother shouldn't do that." A wave of whispers broke out. Judge Harmon struck her gavel. "Order." There were also photographs in the safe. I continued. Photographs of my wife's vehicle. The brake lines had been severed. Lisa allowed the weight of that statement to settle. "Mr. Calloway, please describe your meeting with the defendant at Lake Placid." I felt the memory return vividly, the rain, the cabin, the firelight. The FBI had installed recording equipment inside the cabin. I told Trevor I was ready to surrender my shares and step away from everything. I wanted to understand why. I turned and looked directly at him. He confessed. The words were barely audible. He admitted to hiring Eddie Torres for $15,000 to cut the brake lines on my wife's car. He said Helena was too righteous. He said she had to be removed. Gasps filled the room. He admitted to forging my signature on financial documents to frame me for embezzlement. He described staging the car incident at the river to implicate me. My voice broke despite my effort. He said he didn't need family. He only needed money and power. Tears blurred my vision. He said that in the same cabin where we once spent summers fishing together. I wiped my face. That was when I realized the son I raised was gone. Lisa gave me a moment before stepping back. No further questions. Defense attorney Richard Lawson stood and approached the stand with deliberate calm. "Mr. Calloway," he began smoothly, "you've provided a powerful account, but let me ask you something plainly." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Isn't it true that you are here today not out of devotion to justice, but out of a desire for revenge?" I stared at him. "Revenge?" "Yes," he continued. "Your son publicly accused you of financial crimes. Your reputation collapsed. Your company's stock dropped 40%. The board suspended you. Isn't this trial your opportunity to reclaim what you lost?" The courtroom grew still. "No," I said firmly. Really, Lawson pressed. "You expect this jury to believe that you cooperated with the FB, I orchestrated a recorded confession and brought your own son to trial out of moral principle alone. I met his gaze without wavering. My reputation was damaged, I said, but that is not why I am here. Then why, he asked. Because my wife deserves justice, I replied. Because 200 clients lost their savings. Because truth matters more than image. I paused, and because if I allowed my son to escape accountability, I would be complicit. Lawson's expression hardened. So you don't hate him? No, I said quietly. I do not hate my son. He raised an eyebrow. What do you feel? I grieve, I answered, for the child he once was, for the man he chose to become. Lawson held my gaze a moment longer, then nodded curtly. No further questions. Judge Harmon inclined her head. You may step down, Mr. Calloway. I rose carefully, my legs unsteady. As I walked past the jury box, I felt their eyes following me, not with hostility, but with something closer to sorrow. When I reached the defense table, Trevor looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed now, hollow. He leaned forward slightly and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, I hate you, Dad. The words were not shouted. They were exhausted. I stopped. For a brief moment, time seemed suspended. Then I looked down at him. I know I said softly, but I still love you. His face twisted anger, disbelief, perhaps something else. He turned away. I walked back to my seat beside Jonathan Pierce. As I sat down, I felt my heart fracture again, not from the testimony, not from the accusations, but from the simple, unbearable truth that justice and love can exist in the same room and still tear a family apart. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, 2 hours that stretched and warped until they felt like an entire lifetime. I sat beside Jonathan Pierce in the front row of the courtroom, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my pulse thudded in my ears. Around me, the gallery was packed victims who had lost their savings reporters, clutching notebooks. Strangers drawn by the spectacle of a son tried for betraying his own blood. No one spoke. When the jury finally re-entered the room, Rose as one. Judge Patricia Harmon's expression was unreadable as she addressed the forewoman. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman, a composed middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and steady eyes, stood. We have, Your Honor. My chest tightened. On the charge of conspiracy to cause the death of Helena Calloway, the judge continued. How do you find the defendant? Guilty. The word struck like a bell. On the charge of embezzlement of $47 million. Guilty. Count after count followed. Fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, first-degree murder. Each time the answer was the same. Guilty. By the time the 73rd count was read, the air in the courtroom felt electric. A murmur broke into open sound, gasps, quiet sobs, stunned whispers. Judge Harmon slammed her gavel. Order. She turned toward Trevor. Trevor Calloway, having been found guilty on all counts, this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Trevor did not react. He did not flinch. He did not weep. He sat motionless as if carved from stone, staring straight ahead, as bailiffs stepped forward and fastened handcuffs around his wrists. When they guided him past me, our eyes met for the final time in that courtroom. There was no rage there now, no defiance, only something hollow. Then he was gone. Outside the courthouse steps were crowded. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions I could barely process. But it was not the media that reached me first. It was Margaret Wilson, 70 years old, shoulders frail, but posture proud. The woman who had lost $340,000 while her husband battled cancer. She wrapped her arms around me. Thank you, she whispered against my coat. Thank you for telling the truth. I couldn't speak. I simply nodded. Justice had been delivered. But justice, I realized, does not erase sorrow. It simply draws a line between what was and what must be. 6 months later, in October 2024, I sold my remaining shares in Calloway Financial Group. The transaction yielded $110 million. I used every dollar to establish the Helena Calloway Foundation, an organization dedicated to restoring victims of financial fraud and supporting families devastated by corporate crime. Every client Trevor harmed received full restitution, 100%. Margaret Wilson received her $340,000. Each family was made whole, not only financially, but in dignity. Thomas Parker stepped in permanently as CEO. Under his leadership, the company rebuilt itself carefully, transparently. Trust once broken returns slowly, but it does return. And then the letters began. At first they were brief, awkward apologies written in restrained handwriting. Fragmented thoughts, regret without clarity. Then gradually they deepened. By January 2026, I had received 27 letters. Each one showed a man wrestling with the wreckage of his own choices. The 27th arrived on a quiet winter morning. Snow fell outside my study window, soft and unhurried, blanketing the garden Helena had once tended with such care. I sat at my desk and opened the envelope. Dad, I've been thinking about Lake Placid, the summer when I was 8 and told you that you were my hero. I remember Mom teaching me that honor matters more than money. I remember the fireplace, the rain, the promises. I broke all of them. I don't expect forgiveness, but I understand now what I did to Mom, to you, to those families. It destroyed lives. It destroyed me. Thank you for choosing justice. It was the only thing that could save me. Trevor. I read it twice. Then I set it down carefully and stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of me. For a long time, I did not move. Finally, I picked up my pen. Trevor, I'm not ready to say I forgive you, but I see that you are trying to face what you've done. That matters. Your mother believed that honor mattered more than money. She also believed redemption was possible even after terrible mistakes. I am trying to believe that too. Dad, I folded the letter and sealed it. Then I stood and walked to the window. Snow covered the roses Helena had planted years ago. They lay dormant beneath the white, waiting for spring. Greed had destroyed my family. Ambition without conscience had shattered everything we built. But love, real love, sometimes means allowing consequences. Sometimes it means stepping aside and letting justice take its course so that healing can begin. I thought of Helena. I thought of Trevor. I thought of the families who were slowly rebuilding their lives. And as the snow continued to fall quiet and steady, I whispered into the stillness. Sometimes hope is all we need. Looking back now, I understand something painful. I built a powerful company, but I failed to build unshakable character in my own home. I showed Trevor how to grow wealth, but I didn't show him deeply enough why honor must stand above it. If you take anything from this family story, let it be this: never trade your child's integrity for achievement. Family betrayal doesn't explode overnight. It grows quietly. It forms in small compromises, small lies, small moral shortcuts. What destroyed us wasn't one decision. It was years of unchecked ambition. This family story is not just about crime or money. It's about how family betrayal begins when success becomes more important than conscience. My grandfather used to tell old family story lessons by the fire. He'd say, "When a man worships money, he sacrifices his soul." I wish I had repeated those words more often. I wish I had reminded Trevor that character outlives profit. Scripture asks, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul?" My son gained status, power, influence, and lost himself. Yet even after such family betrayal, I still believe redemption is possible. Justice and love are not opposites. Sometimes true love requires consequences. So here is my advice: guard your home. Teach your children that family betrayal begins the moment money outranks people. Hold them accountable. Tell them stories of honor, not just stories of success. Because wisdom, not wealth, is the inheritance that truly lasts. Now I ask you, if you were in my place, would you choose justice or protect your child? Tell me in the comments. If this story touched you, subscribe and stay with us. Some elements were dramatized for storytelling, but the lesson remains real.